Hey guys, tonight we're wandering back into the damp, soot-smudged streets of 19th century Boston, where horse hooves clack against cobblestones slick with late autumn rain. You pass under flickering gas lamps, coat pulled tight, stepping over puddles that could swallow a boot. The air smells of pipe smoke, damp wool, and boiled cabbage. And while most of the city settles in for the evening, something weird is brewing. Because tonight Boston is planning a funeral. Not for a person. Not for a pet. Not even for a pigeon struck by a rogue trolley. No, tonight's funeral is for a giant teapot. A 225-gallon metal monstrosity, shaped like the kind you'd expect to see on a cartoon stove, if that cartoon stove happened to be the size of a rowboat. You probably won't survive this story. Not from danger, but from how excruciatingly dull, and yet, somehow, still unreasonably dramatic, it all becomes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where, and when, you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge west down Milk Street, past the lingering ghosts of Revolution-era Boston. The echoes of muskets and pamphlets have long faded into financial ledgers and warehouse chatter. It's 1874, a year that feels caught between the hard edges of industrial modernity and the softer, sepia-toned memories of powdered wigs and powdered tempers. The funeral isn't exactly on the schedule of dignified civic events. It's more like an unsanctioned public expression of nostalgic absurdity. A full-on pageant to commemorate the dismantling of an old commercial teapot-shaped sign that once hung above a shop called the Oriental Tea Company. You pass merchants arguing about freight costs, boys racing with delivery carts, and a stray goat chewing on a boot it absolutely did not purchase. Somewhere nearby, someone is tuning a piccolo. You're not sure why, and frankly, either is anyone else. The giant teapot is the main attraction. Not main as in prestigious, but main as in, people keep wandering by to see if this really is happening. And yes, it is. At one point in its life, this metal behemoth had dangled above a storefront on Court Street like some steaming beacon of civic kitsch. It was part advertisement, part oddball landmark, and part social experiment in what the citizens of Boston were willing to tolerate hanging above their heads. The teapot, despite weighing more than a grown man and having a spout you could crawl through, wasn't initially built to be famous. It was built to sell tea. Specifically, the kind imported in crates so ornately labeled that they made spice cabinets jealous. Historians still argue whether the teapot started as a sincere tribute to the Boston Tea Party, or just a marketing gimmick with good timing. Back in its heyday, the teapot's design was a marvel of Victorian whimsy, polished tin plating, a domed lid you could bang like a gong, and rivets that looked like tiny marching beetles in symmetrical formation. It even hissed steam on occasion, though that turned out to be a badly placed radiator vent from the upper floor. But now, the poor thing is being retired. Dismantled. Taken down with what one committee earnestly called du pomp and commercial gravitas. Which is bureaucratic code for, we are going to make this weirder than it has to be. As you hover near the corner where preparations are already beginning, you spot a woman in a bonnet arguing with a man wielding a ladle. Near the gathering point, someone has painted a banner that reads, "Good night, sweet spout." It's unclear whether that's a Shakespeare reference, or just tea-related sleep marketing, but either way, it's more poetic than the actual city ordinance that authorized this farewell. That ordinance, by the way, was tucked inside a list of fire code updates and passed without debate. Classic. The streets hum with light chatter. A group of old men swap stories about how they remember the teapot being installed back when their joints worked better. A younger crowd snickers behind them, already composing editorial headlines for tomorrow's papers. Cup of tears and magnificent CNOFF among the contenders. And you? You lean against a damp brick wall, watching as the outline of this peculiar little ceremony begins to take shape. It's worth noting, this isn't Boston's first teapot drama. Way back in the 1770s, tea caused quite the kerfuffle. That whole Boston Tea Party thing? where colonists dressed like discount Mohawk warriors and tossed tea into the harbor. That happened roughly 100 years before this current metallic monstrosity began its retirement tour. Back then, the fuss was over British taxation, imperial arrogance, and the ever-annoying fact that London didn't bother asking locals whether they liked their tea taxed or not. The East India Company. Imagine if Amazon and Parliament had a confusing baby, dumped boatloads of tea in colonial ports, sparking protests so theatrical they've since become high school play fodder. And now, after a century of history, Boston chooses to remember that era with a teapot bigger than your cousin's canoe. The irony? This teapot didn't protest anything. It didn't dump leaves into harbors. It didn't resist. It just hung there, stoically metal, selling leaves to anyone with pocket change. Still, history's funny like that. The thing that becomes the symbol isn't always the most heroic, or the loudest, or even the most sensical. Sometimes, it's just the thing people saw every day and grew oddly fond of. Like a city squirrel with an eye patch. You're pulled from your thoughts as a brass band begins rehearsing nearby. The notes are approximate. A tuba groans like it's just woken from a nap, and the cymbals crash 3 beats too early. But nobody complains. Because what's more Boston than an off-key funeral for a piece of advertising? As twilight settles into night, the crowd thickens. Lanterns flicker. Children poke one another with paper fans shaped like tiny kettles. Somewhere, someone starts handing out biscuits. And the teapot, gleaming under its shroud of oilcloth and expectation, waits silently. You shuffle a few steps closer to the bundled bulk of the teapot, its shape unmistakable even under the dark canvas. It sits on a wooden platform supported by iron wheels, the kind that creak with every damp breeze. The whole contraption resembles an abandoned parade float that took a wrong turn through a Dickens novel and ended up on the corner of Court Street. This isn't just a whimsical eyesore. No, the teapot has a backstory, and as your boots squish through the muddy slush by the curb, you begin to piece it together from fragments of overheard conversations and half-remembered newspaper columns. The year was 1873 when the Oriental Tea Company decided that mere signage wouldn't do. People walked right past store windows, heads full of trolley schedules and potato prices. What they needed, clearly, was a marketing campaign big enough to bonk them on the forehead. Enter the not-so-little teapot. The idea was simple and unhinged in equal measure. Construct a literal, full-size teapot to hang over the entrance of the shop, complete with spout, handle, and an exaggerated sense of self-importance. A gimmick, yes, but a gimmick with rivets. It was built by a local tinsmith with an eye for the dramatic. The man, whose name has mostly been lost to history, though some suggest it was Elias Burnham or possibly Elijah something or other, was rumored to have said, "If it doesn't make the neighbors nervous, it's not worth mounting." A solid philosophy if you're building carnival rides. Questionable if you're suspending 250 pounds of metal above pedestrians. The teapot itself was forged from sheets of tin and iron, carefully shaped around a wooden frame that reportedly snapped in half twice during construction. Every curve was riveted by hand, which sounds romantic until you remember that riveting was mostly just sweat, swearing, and the occasional smashed thumb. And yet the final result gleamed, a silver bulbous beauty that shone under gaslight and fog alike. It didn't pour tea, of course. That would have been insane. Instead, a hidden pipe vented gentle puffs of steam from its spout, a detail added later, mostly to startle unsuspecting passers-by. Children squealed. Horses sometimes reared. One man supposedly dropped his cigar in horror and refused to walk down Court Street ever again. The shop underneath it sold everything from green tea bricks to ornate tins shaped like imperial dragons. They claimed their blends were inspired by the Boston Tea Party spirit, though whether the East India Company would have appreciated that is, well, historians still argue whether the company's collapse was tragic, deserved, or simply the world's first instance of a giant retail karma boomerang. As you stand near the platform, a man in a wool coat that's definitely too small for him steps up beside you. He's munching on a cold cruller and nodding at the teapot like he's reminiscing about a high school friend who once lit a barn on fire. "You know," he says between chews, that thing's been up there longer than half the marriages in this city. You nod politely, and he adds, they wanted to paint it red once. Some fella said it'd look like it was boiling. He chuckles. Store owner said no. Said Boston wasn't ready for colorful crockery in the sky. You believe it? This is a city that still argues over which alley Paul Revere might have galloped through. The decision to remove the teapot came as quietly as its installation hadn't. Some city inspectors deemed the mounting beams unsafe. One alderman suggested it was a bit much. The owner of the shop had retired to Maine, reportedly to grow rhubarb and forget about urban commerce altogether. And so, the teapot lost its champion and, like many public curiosities, faded into controversy-less decay. Until, of course, someone had the idea to honor it. It started with a letter to the editor, a florid piece of prose from a tea enthusiast, possibly drunk on chamomile, mourning the loss of Boston's most memorable hunk of metal. Then a merchants' guild caught wind and suggested a commemorative send-off. Then someone said funeral, and suddenly, everyone was involved. It spiraled like a soap bubble in a windstorm, delicate, unnecessary, and likely to pop with drama. Even now, as you eavesdrop on nearby whispers, the motivations vary. Some claim it's a statement about remembering Boston's revolutionary past. Others think it's a satire of modern marketing. A third group swears it's just an excuse to dress up and get their names in the paper. Regardless of why, the funeral is definitely happening. Children in colonial caps dart between legs, brandishing cardboard signs with slogans like "one lump or two," and steeped in history. A brass band is still practicing nearby, now accompanied by a triangle player who seems unsure if they're actually part of the performance. You spot a woman arranging bouquets of white lilies around the teapot's base. A small sign identifies her as part of the Boston Ladies' Tea Society, an organization with no fixed address, no charter, and at least 5 different competing factions. One of them, according to local gossip, once tried to ban sugar cubes as imperialist geometry. The flowers are a bit much. But then again, everything tonight is. A poet, because of course there's a poet, reads aloud from a hand-bound pamphlet titled Elegy for a Vessel. It includes the line, "Your steam was brief, but your purpose steep." Somewhere, a pigeon coughs. You shift your weight, trying not to look like you're judging. But you are. Another historian nearby mumbles to her companion, "Well, it's not like Philadelphia ever threw a funeral for a boot-shaped water tower." Her companion nods solemnly, as if this is both true and tragic. And through all of it, the teapot remains motionless. Still dignified, still ridiculous. You can't help but feel a little attached. It's not every day you watch a city embrace its most benign icon with such ceremony. Sure, it's an ad. Sure, it's metal. But it also meant something. Maybe not in a Revolutionary War kind of way, but in a quieter, more civic way. It reminded people they lived in a place strange enough to care about a dangling kettle. Above all else, it was visible. A kind of stability in the chaos of city life. Rain or shine, fire or frost, it was up there, watching, waiting, steaming just a little too dramatically on humid days. Now it's down. About to be carted off, wheels locked, flowers drooping slightly from the drizzle. Somewhere in the crowd, a man adjusts his cravat, and a child drops a cookie into a gutter. Life continues, but tonight it pauses, just long enough to say goodbye to a giant piece of tin. The chill deepens as the sun sinks behind the jagged rooftops, smearing the sky in a bruise-colored haze. Gas lamps flicker to life, their golden glow catching the metallic sheen of the giant teapot as it hunches on its platform like a retired actor awaiting one last scene. You're getting the sense that, for something so absurd, this funeral might actually go full Shakespearean. But to understand why this hunk of theatrical cookware matters at all, you've got to pour back, pun entirely intended, to a far spicier blend of history. It's December 1773. You're still in Boston, but the vibe? Less whimsical, more angry cologne-scented mobs throwing colonial tantrums. Tensions between the American colonists and the British Crown had been simmering for years. And what finally tipped it into a boil? Tea. Specifically the Tea Act, a bit of legislative surprise seasoning from Parliament that allowed the British East India Company to sell its tea in the colonies at reduced rates, but with taxes baked in. The Crown figured, hey, cheaper tea, what's the problem? The colonists replied with a collective eye twitch and the 18th century equivalent of, read the room. They weren't upset about the cost of tea, they were furious about the principle. No colonial representation in Parliament meant that even discounted Darjeeling felt like tyranny in a teacup. So, on the night of December 16, 1773, a ragtag group of colonists, many dressed in rough Mohawk disguises that were as respectful as a ham sandwich at a vegan wake, boarded 3 British ships and hurled 342 chests of tea into the harbor. Historians still argue whether this dramatic brew dump was a brilliant political statement, or just a very soggy waste of perfectly good Assam. The British were not amused. Retaliation came swiftly in the form of the Coercive Acts, which the colonists promptly renamed the Intolerable Acts because we see your stern-sounding legislation and raise you a hissy fit. These punitive laws closed Boston's harbor, disbanded local governance, and basically turned the city into a sulking teenage. Back then, the East India Company was a global powerhouse with its powdered wig jammed into every pocket of trade it could find. The tea it shipped wasn't just about comfort and caffeine, it symbolized commerce, empire, and colonial control. A single chest of tea could hold 100 pounds, and each pound was like a little brick of imperialism, neatly wrapped and royally taxed. So when those crates splashed into the icy harbor, it was more than a symbolic protest. It was an act of commercial sabotage with a surprisingly theatrical flair. Fast forward a century, and you've got Boston simultaneously romanticizing that act and building a giant, consumer-friendly homage to it. Because nothing says down with tyranny like a 10-foot kettle sponsored by a tea shop. It's worth noting, some locals back then didn't support the original Tea Party. They considered it vandalism, plain and simple. Property destruction didn't sit well with everyone, especially merchants and ship owners who saw their insurances spike. And even in the 1870s, Boston remained split on how reverently to treat its rebellious past. There were those who wanted to glorify it, and those who preferred their tea without a side of arson. The Oriental Tea Company, who built the now-doomed giant teapot, wasn't exactly neutral. Their business relied on tying their product to patriotism. Their marketing winked at the past with slogans like freedom in every cup and brewed for Boston spirits, which managed to sound both historical and slightly tipsy. Their shop even featured murals of the harbor protests, though in those paintings, everyone looked suspiciously well-groomed. As you walk past a small knot of young men debating these facts with exaggerated seriousness, one says, "I read somewhere that the real tea chests were marked with dragons." His friend replies, "Dragons don't drink tea. They eat colonists." You keep walking. You're beginning to see how this giant teapot, now preparing for its final journey, isn't just a weird sign. It's a low-stakes battlefield in the long war of American memory. A place where marketing, myth, and metal collide. And it wasn't the only symbol of its kind. Around the same time, other American cities tried similar stunts. Philadelphia flirted with building a giant Liberty Bell made of sugar cubes for a centennial event. New York toyed with hanging a 20-foot wool sock above a textile factory, which, thankfully, never happened. But only Boston had the audacity to build a fully formed, three-dimensional teapot and treat it like a national treasure. Still, not everyone was charmed. You pass by an elderly gentleman frowning into his beard, muttering about silly relics and glorified kettles. He's probably part of the historical purist crowd. Those who believe monuments should be carved from marble, involve serious frowns, and preferably include at least one toga. Others argue that the teapot was actually a distraction from more pressing issues. Boston in the 1870s was no utopia. The city was growing fast, struggling with overcrowding, public health, and the looming scars of the Civil War. In a time of reconstruction and uncertainty, some saw the teapot as frivolous fluff, something glossy to focus on instead of broken sewer lines or wage protests. Yet here it is. Still standing. Still drawing a crowd. You find yourself next to a man in a waistcoat who claims to be a civic folklorist. He tells you that the teapot is really about identity. It's a symbol of Boston's quirky defiance, its history of political theater. Then he pulls out a folded sketch of the original installation and offers to sell it to you for 12 cents. You politely decline. And even now, as that old East India Company spectre hovers quietly in the background, the giant teapot continues to do what it does best: invite confusion. The metal creaks in the night air. Steam rises faintly from a nearby kettle, real, not ceremonial, handed out by volunteers offering small cups of tea to passers-by. You sip one. It's lukewarm and tastes faintly of cloves and something unidentifiable. Possibly dust. Possibly nostalgia. Behind you, someone starts humming God Save the Queen. Whether out of irony or habit, it's hard to tell. A younger voice counters with Yankee Doodle, off-key and too fast. The two melodies collide like tipsy bar patrons, awkwardly and without rhythm. And so, in the strange fog of memory, marketing, and mild hysteria, Boston's big tin teapot prepares for its next act. Or perhaps its last. Because tomorrow, they say, the wheels begin to turn. You return to the present, or, at least, to Boston's present in 1874, as the steam from your flimsy paper teacup curls upward and vanishes into the brisk night air. The scent lingers, barely clove, mostly metal, like someone steeped a library book in lukewarm water. Around you, the crowd thickens. There's a subtle buzz now, less excitement than collective curiosity, the kind you'd find at a town meeting no one really wants to be at but can't quite ignore. This isn't just about saying goodbye to a teapot. No, it's about what happens after the story ends, after the last tea leaf is brewed, after the patriotic metaphors are stretched beyond their logical capacity. Because what came after the Boston Tea Party was confusion. And a lot of it. You glance down the street as a group of amateur historians, dressed in mismatched frock coats, stumble through an impromptu retelling of the infamous night at Griffin's Wharf. The script? Loosely based on facts. The accents? Questionable. One fellow appears to be doing his best Yankee pirate voice, and another keeps referring to King George as Georgie XXX. You wince and keep walking. The thing is, for all its revolutionary flair, the Boston Tea Party didn't instantly rally the colonies into coordinated rebellion. Quite the opposite. In the months and even years after the event, Bostonians found themselves in a tangled mess of political backlash, public squabbles, and social fragmentation. The merchant class, the people who actually owned the ships and cargo, weren't thrilled that their livelihoods had been dumped into salt water. Even though the East India Company was technically the owner of the tea, local middlemen stood to lose serious money. And if there's one thing more volatile than revolution, it's a furious merchant. Newspapers of the time ran conflicting takes. Some hailed the protesters as brave patriots defending liberty. Others grumbled about hooligans in feathers trashing private property. Even John Adams, who later described the event as magnificent, was initially worried it would spark chaos. And, of course, it did. The British Parliament responded by shutting down Boston Harbor under the Port Act, an economic chokehold that turned the already cranky city into a simmering pressure cooker. Commerce stalled. Jobs vanished. Ships sat idle while their hulls grew barnacles and their captains grew ulcers. Imagine trying to import goods when your harbor is basically a swimming pool with guards. You lean against a lamppost now, watching as a man with a bushy mustache reenacts a post-Tea Party town meeting. He's giving a passionate speech to no one in particular, waving a rolled-up pamphlet and declaring, "We cannot boil liberty without kindling compromise." He stumbles over the word compromise, then sneezes directly into his sleeve. It's not riveting theater. What the audience, and you, begin to realize is that after the Tea Party, the sense of unity among the colonies didn't magically appear. Instead, there were months of internal conflict, finger-pointing, and what you might call early American bureaucracy with a side of sass. Committees sprang up overnight. Letters were exchanged in loops so long and passive-aggressive, they might as well have been colonial email chains. Historians still argue whether the Tea Party was truly a mass act of political courage or a highly localized stunt pulled off by a relatively small group of very theatrical agitators. While the symbolism endures, the logistics were messy. Even other colonies, like New York and Pennsylvania, hesitated to jump on board right away. You tossed what? Into where? Are you sure that's how protest works? Still, there's no denying the dramatic impact. Within a year, the First Continental Congress convened, and while they didn't all agree on tea etiquette, they did agree that something had to be done about imperial policies. The seeds of rebellion had been steeped, though some insisted they were more like moldy croutons than revolutionary fertilizer. Back in Boston, the city adapted. Protests evolved into strategy sessions. Radical energy was channeled into town halls and taverns. And over time, that moment of theatrical resistance became, if not a blueprint, at least a very sticky post-it note on the corkboard of American independence. Which brings you back to the current, soggy city block where that symbolism, filtered through a century of memory, has become an actual, physical teapot that once hung over a tea store and is now being mourned like it was Paul Revere's pony. A boy tugs on your coat, asking if you want to buy a historic tea pebble. You look down. He's holding a basket of small gray rocks, each labeled in crooked handwriting. You decline, but appreciate the entrepreneurial spirit. Behind him, a group of women begin arguing over whether the teapot should be moved to the Boston Athenaeum or buried with dignity in the common. One woman suggests turning it into a fountain. Another demands it be melted down and reforged into teaspoons for orphans. The debate goes nowhere, but their knitted shawls swirl dramatically as they storm off in opposite directions. A man standing near a pushcart mutters, "This wouldn't happen in Philadelphia." You don't bother arguing. One thing's certain, in Post, Tea Party Boston, much like in Post, Teapot Boston, meaning is what people make of it. You're not sure if this funeral is a sincere act of homage, an ironic send-off, or just a very long excuse to dress up and hand out lukewarm beverages. Possibly all three. Probably all three. Even now, as another accordion begins to wheeze in the distance, and someone attempts to harmonize over it with a saw, an actual saw, you get the sense that confusion remains Boston's most underrated civic tradition. A rustle behind you. A team of men in vests and flat caps approaches the teapot with ropes and pulley rigs. They're city workers, or perhaps very committed theater folk, it's hard to tell. Their job, begin prepping the teapot for its procession. The funeral march will start soon, and the giant kettle has to be mobile. The crowd hushes slightly, sensing the shift. A child nearby whispers, "Is it gonna cry?" Another one shushes him, gently but firmly, as though the answer might be yes. The ropes are secured. A pulley creaks. The platform lurches slightly as the teapot settles into place. A low metallic groan escapes from under the canvas, echoing through the cobbled street like the sigh of a very tired ghost. You step back. A woman beside you crosses herself. A man removes his hat. Someone begins to hum. In that moment, as absurd and quiet and deeply Bostonian as it is, you feel something shift. Not significance, exactly, but presence. Like watching a clown lay a wreath. Like tipping your hat to a weather vane. Because after all the shouting, the debating, the dumping, the rebuilding, the selling, the branding, the laughing, what's left behind is a city still trying to figure out if its past is a punchline or a poem. And maybe, just maybe, it's both. You barely notice your feet moving, but you're walking again, slowly, carefully, like a guest tiptoeing into a dream that's been underway long before you arrived. The street narrows as you follow the slow trickle of people toward a brick building with large, leaded windows. It's the Merchants' Exchange, one of Boston's more stately civic faces, and tonight, it's also a teapot war room. You push open the heavy wooden door and are immediately hit with warmth, of the physical and the argumentative kind. The interior is bustling, and the scent is a heady mix of oiled furniture, burning coal, and ink-stained ambition. The gaslight flickers over ledgers, waistcoats, and dozens of furrowed brows. This isn't where policy is made, it's where merchants do what merchants have always done: talk loudly, count faster than they listen, and half-listen faster than they agree. Tonight, though, they're not arguing about the price of molasses or the sudden uptick in boot polish theft. No, tonight they're arguing about the legacy of a tin teapot, and whether or not it deserves civic respect. You move toward the center of the room, where a table is piled high with drawings, contracts, and one rogue slice of apple pie that no one's claiming but everyone's eyeing. A large man with a monocle and spectacular mutton chops leans over a blueprint labeled Teapot Disassembly Route, Revised V.4. He taps it with a silver pointer, as if directing an orchestra of accountants. "We cannot," he says firmly, "drag it past the dry goods market. Mrs. Trumbull's stall collapsed last week, and we won't have a repeat of the Cabbage debacle." Murmurs ripple across the room. Someone writes and Cabbages in all caps. These men, merchants, clerks, insurance agents, had, decades ago, benefited from the exact kind of boldness the Tea Party symbolized. But that doesn't mean they're ready to embrace the kitsch. For them, the teapot wasn't just a monument. It was a liability hanging above a storefront, swinging gently in the wind, daring gravity to make its move. Historians still argue whether the teapot was ever officially sanctioned by the exchange, or if it was just tolerated with firm side-eye. Some records show a permit. Others suggest a quiet bribe involving a crate of lapsang souchong and a bottle of port. Either way, it stood for years without collapse, which in Boston terms is practically a landmark. "Do we know what it's made of?" someone asks, from behind a stack of shipping manifests. "It looks like tin, but there's a weird brass ring around the spout. Could be symbolic. Could be just badly welded." Another voice: "We're not burying it, are we? Because if we are, we need to talk depth. Boston soil's basically half horseshoes and buttons." You drift toward a quieter corner, where two older gentlemen are drinking something from matching ceramic mugs shaped like Liberty Bells. One of them, who smells faintly of lamp oil and sarcasm, sees your glance and mutters, "It was always a joke, you know." The teapot. A visual pun with too much budget. You nod. "And now," he continues, "it's got a funeral procession and a children's choir. What's next? A memoir? A teacup sequel?" He chuckles into his drink, but his eyes stay on the room, scanning it like a man watching a slow parade of dreams become paperwork. Someone announces a vote. Not about the funeral, about what will happen to the leftover materials once the teapot is dismantled. The proposals range from melting it down for charity medals to turning it into a weather vane for the new schoolhouse. A rogue voice yells, "What if we just sell it to New York?" Which is met with groans and one dramatic gasp. You learn, through snippets of bickering, that the Merchants' Exchange had once tried to co-opt the symbolism of the original Tea Party. They issued a commemorative coin a few decades back, though it featured a ship that looked suspiciously like a Venetian gondola and caused such an uproar among shipbuilders that the whole batch was quietly recalled. There's a strange comfort to all of this. The way history becomes marketable, how rebellion turns into advertising, and how civic pride eventually gets printed on mugs. You're beginning to see that the story of the teapot isn't about the thing itself, but what people make of it. That it hung in the air for decades, unbroken, gave it power. Not the teapot, but the attention paid to it. A clerk approaches the table with a letter in hand. "Telegram from Springfield," he announces. "They want to know if Boston's truly holding a funeral for a kettle, or if this is some kind of coded warning." Laughter erupts, but the question hangs in the air like steam. What is this, really? A joke? A tribute? An unintentional performance art piece about a city forever caught between its revolutionary mythos and its craving for structure? A wiry man with an ink-stained sleeve proposes a small plaque to be placed where the teapot once hung. Just a simple marker, he says, for future generations to ignore while shopping. The idea is well received. There's something oddly poetic about it, a quiet footnote for a very loud object. The meeting wraps not with consensus, but with exhaustion. Like many Boston meetings, the real work happened in the murmurs and glances, not in the votes. The fate of the teapot remains mostly unresolved, aside from the fact that, come morning, it will be moved. You slip out as the conversation fades behind the thick oak doors. The air outside has turned colder, and the smell of chestnuts from a nearby cart competes with the ever-present aroma of slightly damp history. As you walk away from the exchange, you realize something else. The people who built the teapot, who debated its meaning, and who now organize its ceremonial farewell, all of them are playing a strange, ongoing game of telephone with history. The original Boston Tea Party was never about props. And yet, here you are, watching a city mourn the prop. Back at the square, the teapot sits quietly. The crowds have thinned. A stray dog sniffs at one of the wagon wheels before deciding it's too cold for curiosity. You pause, gazing at the canvas-draped shape. The handle loops like a question mark. The spout points toward the harbor, like it's longing for one last symbolic pour into the Atlantic. Maybe you think this whole affair has nothing to do with tea, or protest, or even history. Maybe it's about how humans are wired to infuse meaning into anything that sticks around long enough. Even a giant tin teapot. And in that moment, absurdity and reverence feel like the same thing, just steeped at different temperatures. You wake up the next morning, not from sleep, but from that foggy half-conscious state only a night of civic nonsense can induce. The sky is pale and dull, the sort of Boston gray that makes every building look like it's been lightly flowered. The street outside your boarding house hums with activity. Wagons rattle, boots slap against wet stone, and someone's already arguing with a horse. Today is the day the teapot moves. You trudge toward the square where it rests, steam rising from a dozen street carts slinging hot rolls and weak coffee. The platform holding the giant teapot is surrounded now by ropes, handlers, and a suspiciously large number of spectators for something described by the city as a low-impact relocation. Except nothing about this teapot's journey will be low-impact. The route has been planned with military precision, or, at least, theatrical flair. It will begin here on Court Street, weave past Washington, cross Milk, then finally arrive at a small lot near Dock Square, where some sort of farewell platform has been cobbled together out of retired fish crates and a repurposed pulpit. The handlers are a rough and ready bunch, city workers mixed with hired haulers from Charlestown. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a bandaged thumb and the permanent scowl of someone who's been yelled at by 4 aldermen before breakfast, is barking orders. Easy on the straps. I said taut, not strangled. You watch as they test the platform's wheels, which groan under the weight like they're composing a slow dirge in G minor. The teapot is massive, nearly 10 feet wide and shimmering faintly under its oilcloth, which flaps like a mourning veil every time the wind sneaks through the alley. Someone strikes a drum. It's not clear if this is ceremonial, or just a bored child with rhythm issues. Either way, it marks the beginning of the procession. And so, it begins. The teapot rolls forward slowly, pulled by 2 heavy horses named Patriot and Liberty, because of course they are. Their manes are braided with red, white, and blue ribbons, and Liberty keeps trying to eat hers. A small brass band falls into step behind them, trumpets slightly out of tune, cymbals dangerously enthusiastic. You walk alongside, swept up in the strange dignity of the thing. People lean out of windows, waving handkerchiefs and shouting half-hearted cheers. A baker offers free tea cakes to children. One of them throws his at the teapot, and is immediately tackled by his nanny with the kind of speed that suggests this isn't his first baked goods offense. It takes a full 20 minutes to round the corner onto Milk Street. The incline is gentle, but every foot forward feels like a battle. The teapot lurches slightly, tipping just enough to make everyone gasp. The haulers adjust ropes, mutter curses, and move on. You overhear a woman say, "I heard they filled it with actual tea for ballast." Her companion replies, I heard it's full of sawdust and pipe smoke. Both nod as if either answer explains everything. The truth? No one's quite sure. The Oriental Tea Company never clarified what was inside, and the city inspectors refused to poke too hard for fear of disturbing potential pressurized sarcasm. Historians still argue whether the teapot was ever filled, or whether the sound of liquid sloshing was just condensation and wishful thinking. One Boston Weekly article claimed the teapot contained a reservoir of strong national sentiment, and possibly cinnamon. You decide not to test it. As the procession moves onward, more spectators join. A group of schoolchildren files into position, waving hand-painted signs, "Thank you, Spouty, rest in tease," and one particularly unhinged banner that simply says TA equals me. Their teacher, red-faced and hoarse from trying to instill order, quietly weeps into her gloves. You pass the old newspaper office, where several editors peer out through the cracked glass. One, a thin man with inky fingers, scribbles furiously in a notebook. You catch a glimpse of his headline in progress. Kettle calls it quits. Not his best work. Further down the route, a man in full colonial regalia hands out copies of a pamphlet titled Let This Be Our Steepest Hour. It features a poem on the back, rhyming brew with you at least 5 times, and includes a sketch of the teapot with heroic muscles. You tuck it discreetly into a trash bin. At Milk Street's end, the route veers sharply. This part was not in the original plan. You hear frantic whispers, "What's happening? That's not the approved angle." It turns out a fruit cart has overturned, and the road ahead is now a war zone of rolling oranges and broken crates. The handler waves to the band, who play a confusing vamp as the teapot is redirected through a narrower alley, one flanked with laundry lines and deeply judgmental cats. It squeezes through with mere inches to spare. You can hear the oilcloth scraping brick. It's oddly suspenseful. You hold your breath. Everyone does. Then freedom. The teapot emerges like a noble beast from a tunnel of doubt, and the crowd erupts into applause. One man starts crying. Whether from relief, patriotism, or a deep personal bond with beverage containers, you're not sure. By now, the square is visible ahead. The makeshift platform is modest, a bit of bunting here, a few chairs there. A podium has been placed in front, currently being tested by a man tapping it repeatedly while whispering testing, testing. May the leaves be with you. The teapot slows. The horses stop. Final adjustments are made. And then, in a moment both grand and inexplicably awkward, the cloth is pulled away. There it is. The giant teapot of Boston, gleaming and ridiculous, free from its fabric shroud. It's slightly dented. The spout lists to the left. The handle has a crack near the base. But none of that matters. The people cheer anyway, clapping for this strange vessel that hung over them for years like a stubborn question mark. You look around. Some people are genuinely moved. Others are clearly just here for the snacks. Vendors hawk teacup-shaped cookies, mini flags, and I'm warned the teapot pins in 5 different fonts. A man offers freshly steeped Liberty in small wooden mugs. It's definitely just hot water and lemon. You sip because why not? As the crowd settles into the square, a man begins to sing, off-key, yes, but passionately. A slow, crooning version of My Country, 'Tis of Thee, with added lyrics about spouts of pride and boiling dreams. It's absurd. And perfect. Because here you are, in a city that threw a tantrum over tea, then made a monument to that tantrum, then gave that monument a funeral. And somehow, it all makes sense. Sort of. You shuffle closer to the front of the square now, drawn in by the gravitational pull of ceremonial pageantry unfolding in the least dignified way possible. The teapot, resplendent in its lopsided glory, sits at the center of it all like a tin monarch awaiting its final decree. Around it, city workers hover like nervous footmen, brushing dirt off the platform, straightening ropes that don't need straightening, and generally giving the impression of being useful without doing too much. Then someone yells, "It's time," and instantly regrets it, because everyone starts moving at once. The brass band retunes with aggressive confidence. The cymbal player from yesterday is back, and he's found a friend with a tambourine. Together, they produce a rhythm so jarring it might be a new form of protest. Somewhere in the back, a man in a stovepipe hat holds up a clipboard and begins herding speakers toward the podium like a tired goat wrangler. You, meanwhile, notice a small boat of sorts pulling up along the wharf just past the square. A tugboat. Sleek and soot-smeared, it drifts in with the tide like it knows it's about to participate in something that doesn't make a lick of nautical sense. And that's when it hits you, oh no. They're going to float the Teapot. Yes, today isn't just about speeches and cookies shaped like colonial wigs. It's about spectacle. The plan, cooked up by a committee that definitely drank too much elderflower wine, was to take the giant teapot, mounted on a barge, and float it ceremoniously into the harbor. Not to dispose of it. No, just to give it a harbor farewell. Like a Viking ship funeral, but with fewer flaming arrows and more risk of mild water damage. You glance at the harbor's edge, where a makeshift ramp has been constructed out of questionable lumber and optimism. It slopes downward toward a wooden float bobbing with the enthusiasm of a duck that's had one too many biscuits. Two men are hammering reinforcements onto its edges, while another ties a very serious knot that will later be referred to as that one that didn't work. The crowd, unaware of the impending maritime mayhem, settles into folding chairs and wooden crates. Children sit on their parents' laps, fiddling with souvenir spoons. A dog in a waistcoat walks by, entirely unbothered. And then, the teapot begins to move again. Well, sort of. A fresh team of haulers begins the slow roll toward the ramp. The crowd murmurs, shifting forward in a collective lean. You hear phrases like reckless brilliance and insurance nightmare. You cannot help but agree with both. The wheels of the platform creak and pop. A city official paces nearby, muttering calculations about weight distribution and acceptable levels of flotation. Another man clutches blueprints that appear to be drawn in pencil over a fish wrapper. When the platform hits the incline of the ramp, there's an audible groan, not just from the wood, but from the onlookers, who collectively realize this is either going to work beautifully or be the most memorable municipal failure since someone tried to pave a road with oyster shells. The front wheels reach the edge of the barge. A moment of suspense. Then, just barely, they catch. A round of polite applause rises from the crowd, as though everyone is congratulating themselves for not breathing too loudly. But now comes the hard part. Getting the rest of the teapot onto the barge requires an extraordinary act of balance, strength, and spiritual faith in nails that really should have been checked twice. The rear wheels hesitate on the edge of the ramp. The wood beneath them flexes. The ropes tighten like tendons. For a moment, it all feels frozen, just spout, sky, and collective civic anxiety. And then, with a jolt, it happens. The whole teapot lurches forward, the platform's weight settling unevenly onto the barge. The rear wheels bounce once, twice, before slamming down with a resonant thud that makes 3 pigeons take flight and one small child burst into tears. Somewhere, a man yells, "It floats." Someone else replies, "Define float." Because technically, yes, it's on the water. But floating is generous. The barge sinks at least 6 inches the moment the full weight of the teapot settles on it. Water sloshes over the sides in protest. One of the ropes snaps with a festive twang. The teapot wobbles gently, like it's reconsidering its choices. The tugboat pulls closer, its captain eyeing the situation with the same face a baker gives a collapsing soufflé. He shouts something indecipherable. A boy on the dock salutes. No one knows why. A fresh rope is thrown, tied, retied, and then ceremonially blessed by a bystander waving a biscuit. The barge begins to move, slowly, carefully, guided by the tug. The teapot shifts with every lurch, groaning in metallic protest. You walk along the wharf as the barge glides, trudges, past the dock. The crowd moves with it, cheering, waving handkerchiefs, tossed. The harbor's water sparkles dully under the midday sun. Gulls circle, confused but intrigued. A nearby fisherman casts a line, pauses, then mutters, "What in Neptune's name?" as the teapot floats by like a dream that's lost its plot. There's something undeniably moving about it. The way it sits there, squat and dignified, drifting past ships and warehouses. A tribute not just to history, but to Boston's long-standing tradition of doing things in the most unnecessarily dramatic way possible. Historians still argue whether this floating stunt was purely symbolic or secretly a logistical step toward relocating the teapot for permanent display. Some claimed it was destined for a museum. Others said it was being delivered to the mayor's summer cottage. A few suspected it was headed for storage behind a bakery, never to be seen again. You, personally, suspect nobody actually knows. The barge makes a slow loop near the far wharf, drawing cheers from the distant side of the harbor. A cannon, comically small, is fired from the tugboat, producing a puff of smoke and a sound like someone sneezing into a trumpet mute. It does nothing, means nothing, and somehow adds everything. Then the teapot begins its return. The tide has turned slightly, and the wind picks up. The barge sways more now. The platform creaks ominously. A rope begins to fray, then snaps entirely. The teapot shifts a few inches to the left. One of the handlers shouts, "Hold fast." Even though they're not holding anything. There's a moment of genuine concern. A corner dips into the water, and for a breathless second, it seems the giant teapot might just tip over entirely, flipping into the harbor like a bloated silverfish. But no, it rights itself. The water sloshes dramatically. A wave hits a bystander's shoes. He screams like he's been shot. And then, at last, it docks. The crowd erupts. There's clapping, hooting, someone waving a ladle in triumph. You lean against a post, watching as the crew begins retying every rope twice. The teapot sits soggy but triumphant, like a ship that didn't quite sink, but definitely learned something. You smile, despite yourself. Because Boston just floated a giant teapot across its harbor. On purpose. And somehow it worked. You linger near the dock, boots planted on damp wood, watching as the tugboat detaches its line and backs away like it wants nothing more to do with this civic tea circus. The giant teapot now rests uneasily on the barge, dripping from its brief nautical misadventure, its proud spout pointed once more toward the city. But the day isn't over. Not even close. Because now, it's time for what some local committee has enthusiastically dubbed the ceremonial steep, a block-wide public performance meant to reinvigorate the revolutionary spirit through pageantry, infusion, and allegorical pouring. You don't know exactly what that means, and judging by the faces of those setting up the stage nearby, neither does anyone else. You shuffle up the slope toward a cordoned-off lot where the performance is to take place. The grass is patchy, trampled into mud by hundreds of boots. A temporary wooden stage stands off-center, painted the color of weak tea, and topped with a ridiculous foam cut out of a steaming kettle. A sign reads, "A nation steeped in liberty." You try not to sigh too loudly. The actors begin to arrive in costume, ruffled shirts, velvet breeches, tri-cornered hats so wide they block the sun. There's a woman in an enormous powdered wig, looking deeply unhappy about the weight of symbolic patriotism on her scalp. A man wearing an apron labeled T. Munder General struts across the stage with the smugness of someone about to deliver 3 metaphors and a pun in rapid succession. The crowd gathers. Children sit cross-legged on blankets. Vendors circle the edges selling everything from gingerbread scrolls to tin whistles shaped like teaspoons. Someone nearby offers spiritual steeping readings, which involves placing a hand on a warm mug and listening to the leaf. You give them a polite no thank you and edge away. Then the music starts, fiddles, flutes, and one bagpipe that clearly missed its cue. The actors take their positions, and the ceremony begins. The play is ambitious. Act 1, The People Are Parched. It opens with a group of colonial characters crying out in exaggerated thirst. "Oh, what foul taxation dries our very throats!" cries one. Another falls dramatically to the ground, whispering, "Will no leaf soothe us?" The audience chuckles, gently, indulgently, like watching your cousin's talent show. Act 2, The Infusion of Freedom. A group of rebels arrives, holding aloft a massive papier-mâché tea bag. It's carried with the kind of reverence usually reserved for ancient relics or poorly inflated balloons. They dunk it repeatedly into a barrel-marked tyranny, while chanting, "Steep us strong! Steep us wise! Let no kings blind our eyes!" You catch the eye of a man nearby who mutters, "I think I'm developing a caffeine sensitivity just watching this." You nod solemnly. Act 3, Pouring the People's Will. The final scene involves the cast circling the stage, miming the act of pouring tea over a map of the colonies. There is no actual liquid involved, which is for the best considering the map is paper and the weather's turned breezy. Still, the moment is oddly stirring. Something about the rhythm of it all, the chorus, the uniforms, the accidental earnestness. You hear someone sniffle behind you. Whether it's tears or allergies, hard to say. Then comes the speech. The tea-monger general steps forward. He clears his throat with the grandeur of a man who's been waiting for this moment his entire life. Or at least since breakfast. "Let this vessel, though inanimate, though made of common metal, be known henceforth as a symbol not of warmth alone, but of what we the people dared to do in the face of oppressive infusion." He pauses for effect. No one stops him. "Let this humble pot remind us all that liberty, like tea, must be steeped patiently, handled with care, and shared amongst the many." Polite clapping. Someone nearby murmurs, "He could have just said don't forget the teapot, but okay." As the applause dies down, a small cannon is fired, not the same one from the tugboat, mind you, but another one, brought out for the occasion. This one is filled with dried herbs instead of gunpowder. It emits a puff of chamomile into the air. The breeze carries it directly into the face of a city councilman, who promptly sneezes 7 times and has to be escorted off stage. The ceremony concludes with the cast linking arms and singing an original composition titled For Leaf and Liberty. It's set to the tune of Greensleeves, and includes the lyric, "From kettle's call to harbor's edge, our dreams in teacups lie." You suppress a laugh. Barely. Once the music ends, the crowd disperses. Some leave in silence, some laughing softly, and others rushing off to catch the next commemorative performance, the boiling of empire, held behind a bakery using leftover biscuit tins as props. You wander back to the square, stepping around muddy footprints and confetti made from shredded shipping invoices. The teapot, still on its barge, sits patiently as the tide nudges it against the dock. The platform creaks again, but this time it sounds almost content. You lean on a post and watch it breathe, so to speak. A nearby vendor is packing up. "Didn't expect to sell out of Spout's honor pins," he says. "Next time, I'll bring more." You wonder, silently, how many next times he imagines there will. As the light begins to fade and dusk settles over the harbor, a few stragglers remain. A child runs up to the teapot and pats it gently, then runs off. A couple stands side by side, whispering something nostalgic. You overhear, "Remember when it first went up? I remember thinking it would fall down." And maybe that's the strange power of this whole affair. For all the theatrics and symbolism, for all the fake tea bags and overly sincere speeches, the teapot did something rare. It lasted. Long enough to mean something. Long enough to be remembered. Historians still argue whether the entire spectacle, the pageants, the floating, the speeches, was ever meant to be sincere or if it was all a kind of civic satire that got out of hand. Some call it performance art. Others call it municipal identity therapy. One professor reportedly called it Boston's biggest unintentional haiku. You call it oddly soothing. A city honoring its history not with granite and bronze, but with a steaming kettle, some fiddle music, and a whole lot of questionable metaphors. And as the sun dips low, casting an orange shimmer on the harbor's surface, you think, maybe that's the best kind of history. The kind that doesn't try too hard to be heroic. The kind that just is funny, confused, sincere in its own ridiculous way. The teapot doesn't speak. It doesn't sparkle. It doesn't pour. But it did float. And somehow, that was enough. You're still standing near the teapot when the next phase of the day's elaborate farewell kicks into motion, something the flyers describe as the evening tableau, colonial echoes in copper and cloth. You're not entirely sure what that means, but you're already here, and your boots are too wet to protest. The crowd gathers again, slower this time, hushed not from reverence but from the kind of collective fatigue that comes after hours of civic enthusiasm. Children chew on molasses sticks, adults lean against barrels and railings, and someone nearby mutters, "It's been a long day for a beverage metaphor." A makeshift stage has been erected at the edge of the wharf, lit by hanging lanterns that swing gently in the harbor breeze. Their glow casts long shadows across the planks, and suddenly everything looks a little more dramatic than it probably should. Then, from the darkness, they appear, a group of amateur reenactors in colonial garb, emerging like a ghostly diorama of questionable fashion choices. And you realize what's happening. It's time for the historical reenactments. Oh no. You recognize a few faces from earlier performances. The T. Munder General, now stripped of his honorary ladle, leads a procession of patriots dragging crates marked TA, with suspiciously modern handwriting. They march solemnly to the edge of the stage, miming exhaustion with exaggerated sighs and clutching their lower backs like everyone's playing someone twice their age. Then comes the harbor toss. The actors line up, one by one, and pretend to hurl the crates overboard, except instead of letting them go, they freeze mid-motion, holding impossible poses while the narrator begins. He's a thin man with wild eyebrows and a voice like burnt toast. Behold, he begins, the Sons of Liberty, bearing their caffeinated burden. You're fairly certain he means decaffeinated, but no one corrects him. The scene holds. The narrator drones on. These brave citizens, cloaked in midnight and principle, face tyranny with only disguise and determination. You count 3 feather headdresses, 1 straw hat, and what might be a theatrical lion's mane. Historically accurate? Not in the slightest. Entertaining? Absolutely. The tableau continues, each scene depicting moments from colonial lore with varying degrees of believability and polyester. There's Paul Revere doing his midnight ride, on a wheelbarrow with cardboard horse ears. There's a town meeting, represented by 6 people gesturing at an empty chair with visible frustration. One performer, clearly improvising, picks up a spoon and pretends it's a quill. The woman next to you whispers, "I think he's trying to sign the Constitution." The teapot, now lit softly from below, watches this all unfold from its resting place like a bemused observer. For a moment, you almost see a glint in its dented curve, as if it too is raising one skeptical brow. Now the narrator has reached the part about Boston's eternal spirit. He speaks as though revealing a great secret, and though the leaves may crumble, the cup may chip, the kettle may tarnish, the tea of liberty will never cool. A pause. Scattered claps. Someone shouts, "Say it again but with feeling." Laughter ripples through the audience. You can't help but admire it though. The effort. The sheer, unrelenting commitment to turning tea into theater. Boston, as always, refuses to do things halfway. When it honors its history, it doesn't whisper. It dresses up, waves a flag, rents a tugboat, and constructs a fake tea crate out of staged plywood. Some historians, probably huddled somewhere warm, clutching their annotated manuscripts, would bristle at the inaccuracies. They'd point out that the real Boston Tea Party wasn't an organized stage production. It was frantic, messy, a bit slapdash. The disguises were crude, the motivations varied, and the impact wasn't immediately clear. But perhaps that's exactly why this oddball dramatization works. Because it doesn't try to be perfect. It just tries to remember. Historians still argue whether colonial reenactments do more harm than good, whether they inform or just entertain, whether they cement mythology or invite deeper questioning. You're not sure either. But you do know this. Watching a man pretend to throw tea into an invisible harbor, while wearing rain boots painted to look like buckled shoes is doing something very specific to your heart. The scene ends. The lights dim. The crowd claps politely, grateful and perhaps relieved. A man in the audience stands up and, unprompted, delivers his own monologue. "I was here," he says, with a voice that crackles like dry paper, "when the teapot first went up. Watched it swing in the wind outside that tea shop. Watched it every day on my way to work. Thought it was ugly. Thought it was silly. Then one day it didn't seem so silly anymore. Just there. Like a neighbor you don't talk to but always wave at." The crowd falls quiet. "And now we're here. And it's going. And I guess I'll miss it." He sits. No one applauds, but not because they didn't appreciate it. It just didn't feel like the kind of thing you clap for. Somewhere in the distance, a foghorn moans, a low, aching sound that rolls over the water like a sigh. A final note from the harbor itself. The actors bow. The lights go out. The crowd, slowly, begins to disperse once more. You remain a little longer, watching the stage empty and the last lanterns flicker. The smell of damp wood and cooling brass fills the air. Someone nearby says they should have let the teapot talk, and someone else responds, "It's said enough already." And perhaps they're right. You start your walk back toward town, following the cobblestones slick with evening dew. Behind you, the teapot sits silhouetted against the moonlight, still and serene. A little absurd. A little beautiful. Just like the story it represents. The morning after the performance, Boston wakes slowly. The cobbled streets glisten with last night's drizzle, and somewhere a cart rattles over loose stones, the wheels squeaking like a violin being strangled. You make your way back to the harbor square, half expecting the giant teapot to be gone, vanished in the night like some mysterious relic from a fever dream. But no, it's still there. Immovable. Slightly damp. Glinting in the half-light like it just remembered it once tried to float. Today, though, the tone has shifted. A new group has arrived, shouldering banners and pamphlets and solemn faces, the Temperance Crusaders. You spot them instantly by the matching sashes reading TA, not tavern, and pour out the punch. They form a neat semicircle around the base of the platform, lips pursed, back straight, radiating moral resolve and a faint aroma of lavender soap. If yesterday's events were theatrical, today leans preachy. These are the reformers, the social correctors, the believers that a society is only as strong as its sobriety. To them, the teapot isn't just a symbol of protest, it's a mascot. A pure, steamy beacon of everything clean living and upright. No taverns. No brandy. Just hot water and virtue. A tall woman with iron-gray hair and the shoulders of someone who's flipped at least 3 tables in her lifetime steps up onto a crate. This, she says, gesturing at the teapot, is the symbol of a nation unclouded by spirits, except the Holy One. Polite claps. One enthusiastic amen. A pigeon flutters down nearby, unimpressed. You take a few steps back, listening. The speech continues. Our forefathers, the speaker proclaims, cast off the yoke of tyranny and took up the cup of liberty, not ale, not whiskey, but TA. Modest. Mind-sharpening. And most importantly, unfermented. You glance around. A few men in the crowd suppress smirks. One mutters, pretty sure Sam Adams was pro-beer. Another says, Paul Revere owned a distillery. This is Boston, after all. Revolution and rum are intertwined like ivy on a grave. Historians still argue whether temperance groups of the era were truly unified or just a loosely organized chorus of frowns. Some focused on alcohol reform. Others expanded into fashion, music, and even dancing. A few proposed renaming pubs as sobriety stations. That didn't catch on. Today's speech concludes with a moment of silence. For what, no one specifies. Possibly for lost virtue. Possibly for the punch bowl that never was. Then the flyers are passed around. Thick paper. Bold font. Tia's Moral Compass, a civic lecture series. Scheduled at church basements, reading halls, and one inexplicably located in a converted lighthouse. The image on the cover? The same giant teapot, now with a glowing halo. You consider taking one. Then decide you'd rather not be asked for a donation. As the temperance group retreats into orderly formation, their leader stops to pat the teapot. "Your message shall steep forever," she says. You imagine the teapot groaning internally. But as they leave, another wave of people arrives, and their vibe could not be more different. These are the tavern-goers, the barkeeps, the cocktail partisans. A group from the Liberty Punch Society holds up their own sign, "Let us toast what they tossed." They're handing out recipe cards for historical rum tea and arguing that the revolution was fueled as much by spirits as by spirit. One of them, a young man with a top hat far too big for his face, proclaims, "The Boston Tea Party was a statement, yes. But it was also a celebration. Of defiance. Of community. And yes, of a good drink shared among equals." He pulls out a flask. Takes a sip. Offers it to the crowd. The temperance crew, it's only a matter of time before the two groups collide. They don't shout, not exactly. But pointed comments begin to fly like overboiled peas. One woman from the temperance group hisses, "You dishonor the leaf." A tavern supporter retorts, "The founders knew how to party." A third voice yells, "Cider counts as fruit." Soon the square is a swirl of earnest moral claims and sarcastic toasts. One man starts juggling teacups until one breaks, prompting a gasp that sounds like someone just insulted the Magna Carta. You drift to the edge of the fray, watching as the city wrestles, gently, loudly, with its past. The teapot stands in the middle, utterly still. It absorbs the tension like it absorbs rain, with quiet inevitability. What was meant to be a retirement parade has now become an ideological tug-of-war. Tea is no longer just a beverage. It's a battleground. A line in the sand, or the sugar bowl, depending on whom you ask. And yet, this all feels familiar. Because Boston has always done this, taken something ordinary and infused it with meaning until it bursts. Tea, bread, buttons, barrels. If it can be thrown, marched with, or set on fire in protest, Boston's found a way to do it. And more than once. The great irony, of course, is that the original Tea Party wasn't about tea. It was about control, representation, autonomy. The tea was just the vessel, literally and figuratively. But try telling that to a woman now offering revolutionary detox tonic from a mason jar she insists is blessed with John Hancock's spirit. You try not to laugh. She hands you a sample. It tastes like lemon, hope, and regret. Nearby, someone has placed a small placard next to the teapot. It reads, "Don't make it a museum piece, make it a movement." No one claims credit, but a dozen people take turns photographing it. You wonder what the teapot makes of all this. If it could feel, it would probably be exhausted. Used, reused, reinterpreted by every philosophy under the sun. All it wanted was to hang outside a shop and sell leaves. You glance up at it again. Its rivets look like tired eyes now. Its spout tilts forward like a reluctant nod. Its once polished body is speckled with fingerprints and streaks of pollen. It's not beautiful anymore, if it ever was. But it's loved, in that complicated way cities love their strangest things. By afternoon, the crowds thin again. The moralists retreat to their flyers. The tavern folks head toward actual taverns. The square breathes. You sit on the edge of the dock, shoes just shy of the water. The teapot looms behind you, casting a long, warped shadow. It occurs to you that everyone's been pouring themselves into this object. Hopes, nostalgia, meaning. But in the end, it's still just a thing. A funny, beloved, absurd thing. And somehow, that's enough to bring out the best and worst of everyone who gathers near it. A stray breeze whistles through the spout. You decide to take that as a sigh. You return to the square that evening, drawn not by duty or spectacle, but by sheer curiosity. The light is softer now, that golden pre-dusk hue that makes even soggy bricks look like a painting. The teapot, perched stoically on its barge, remains the unmoved centerpiece of what is now, depending on whom you ask, either a local legend in progress or a civic embarrassment clinging to its final ounce of relevance. But it's not the teapot that draws your eye this time. It's the cluster of people off to the side, just past the faded bunting and half-eaten gingerbread effigies. They're standing near a chalkboard, yes, a literal chalkboard, propped against a barrel and scrawled with the words, "What the teapot means to me." You squint. Below the title, passers-by have written in looping, sometimes unreadable cursive. You drift closer. The first message reads, "It's the only thing in this." A local newspaper editor stands nearby, notepad in hand, clearly sniffing out a human interest story. He interviews a woman wearing 3 shawls and a bonnet so large it could comfortably host a pigeon tea party. "To me," she says, "the teapot represents consistency. My husband left. My daughter moved to Vermont. But that teapot never left." The reporter scribbles rapidly, visibly calculating how many column inches of weepy public sentiment he can squeeze between ads for saddle polish and medicinal licorice. Another man, clearly more cynical, mutters, "It's a glorified sales gimmick. Why are we treating it like it died in battle?" The editor looks up. "But isn't that the point? That people do care, even when it's absurd?" You think of yesterday's floating procession, of the mock ceremony, of the off-key bagpipes, the performative pouring, the woman handing out tonic that tasted like sadness in a jar. You think, maybe absurdity is the point. Later, over on the steps of a nearby building, a new gathering forms. This time it's the local literary club, self-appointed, semi-organized, and more than ready to share their thoughts on the teapot through prose. They're calling it the Symposium of Spout. You have your doubts. But you wander closer anyway. A young man with too many cravats and not enough editing opens with a sonnet. "O kettle proud, thou vessel vast and bold, thy lid doth gleam though thou art damp and cold. What purpose stews within thy rounded shell? A nation's thirst? A freedom we can't quell?" The applause is polite, possibly generous. Next comes a woman with a short essay titled "Boiling Over, the Teapot as National Conscience." It includes 3 metaphors, 2 footnotes, spoken aloud, awkwardly, and 1 lengthy tangent about the symbolism of spouts in European folklore. You zone out somewhere around the phrase proto-industrial infusion as identity marker. Still, there's something oddly comforting about this layer of civic participation. Some towns erect statues. Boston holds a reading circle in front of an aluminum prop and treats it like a lost founding father. You catch wind of another editorial in progress, this one from a rival paper. A young columnist is pacing, gesturing with his pen like a sword. "We mustn't let sentiment turn us soft," he declares to no one in particular. Next thing you know, there'll be morning lamp posts. "We must draw the line." "Where?" someone calls. He pauses. Right before the weeping begins. And that, really, is the debate now bubbling under every polite exchange and public display. What is the line? When does history shift from solemn to silly? At what point does reverence for the past become a kind of unintentional self-parody? Historians still argue whether cultural memory is more honest when left messy, or more useful when neatly dramatized. Whether civic rituals like this, teapot funeral and all, help connect us to something deeper, or simply serve as distractions from modern discontent. In Boston's case, it's hard to say. This is, after all, a city where arguments about alley names have lasted longer than some local marriages. Where every 3rd building has a plaque and every 4th citizen believes their ancestor personally handed tea to Paul Revere. So maybe the teapot's greatest legacy isn't patriotism or protest, but community theater. Because while you stand there, watching neighbors gather, teenagers snort laugh at the word infusion, and a dog named Abigail sniff a bouquet left on the platform like it holds answers, there's an undeniable togetherness to it all. The city is doing what cities rarely get to do, slow down and remember, not the facts, but the feelings. Not the grand events of textbooks, but the small oddities that hung over storefronts and became, somehow, part of the skyline of memory. You sit down on the edge of a low brick planter. A man next to you, older, soft-spoken, nods toward the teapot. "Used to bring my grandkids by to see it," he says. "Told them it was magic. Said if you stood under it and made a wish, it'd come true. You raise an eyebrow. Did it? He grins. Nah. But they got quiet for 10 whole seconds. Close enough. Silence falls for a beat, comfortable now. You watch as someone tucks a folded note into the teapot's spout. A small gesture, unnoticed by most. Probably a wish. Or a memory. Maybe even an apology. Then, a voice breaks the calm. A woman in a fine velvet cape, clearly a librarian or someone who's threatened to ban someone from a library, announces that a local composer has written a teapot-inspired waltz, and that she will now perform it on a borrowed accordion. The opening notes are ambitious. The rhythm, less so. But by the second verse, people begin humming. By the third, someone is dancing. By the fourth, even you start tapping your foot, gently, cautiously, like your dignity is on a dimmer switch. It's silly. It's sincere. It's utterly Boston. And as twilight descends, softening the hard lines of the dock, the street lamps begin to buzz to life. The accordion sighs. The dancing slows. And the teapot, standing silent and streaked with shadows, watches over it all like a strange old friend. Maybe that's what it means to mourn a metal teapot. Not to cry over it, but to laugh around it. To remember the ridiculous with reverence. To give meaning to the things we once thought meaningless. And to find, in the shared absurdity, a kind of gentle unity. Morning returns, and with it, the full glory, or depending on your perspective, horror, of the funeral parade. You arrive at the square just as the brass band warms up, producing a range of tones that sound suspiciously like a marching goose with sinus problems. Behind them, a ragtag army of marchers assembles, shopkeepers in frilled waistcoats, schoolchildren waving kettle-shaped flags, at least one woman wearing a costume that seems to be a literal walking teacup. Welcome to Boston's grand farewell to the teapot, a procession so sincere and so utterly confusing, you suspect even the teapot itself would be blushing under its rivets. The route has been finalized, or at least heavily improvised. It winds through some of Boston's oldest streets, designed long before modern parades were a concept and long after logic was. The cobblestones are uneven, the alleys too narrow, and the turns tight enough to test the very structural faith in the teapot's rolling platform. At the front of the line is a man on stilts wearing a powdered wig and carrying a feathered quill the size of a canoe paddle. He salutes the crowd with exaggerated gravity. "I am the spirit of 1773, he booms. A child nearby shrieks in delighted terror. Behind him, a line of florists dressed as colonial flower girls toss rose petals onto the street, though they quickly run out and resort to dried herbs. Bay leaves flutter to the ground with what might be considered historic irony. Then comes the teapot. Pulled by two reluctant horses, Liberty and Patriot, still ribboned and clearly over it, the platform creaks into motion. The teapot glimmers weakly in the pale sunlight, its spout held high like it's trying to catch the scent of dignity in the wind. It's been polished again, though the dents remain, now framed with decorative bunting in red, blue, and a greenish gold that clashes so confidently it somehow works. The crowd erupts in cheers. Hats are removed. Handkerchiefs wave. You hear someone cry, "God bless the spout!" Someone else replies, "And the handle too!" This is not your average funeral. You walk beside the parade, keeping pace as it meanders past the butcher's, past the bookshop with the three-legged cat in the window, and past a row of tenement balconies now lined with spectators drinking from mismatched teacups. Some wave solemnly. Others toast. One elderly woman throws confetti made from shredded recipes, which lands on a passing actor dressed as Benjamin Franklin. He stops to read one. "Oyster pudding?" he mutters. "We are indeed a strange people." A large papier-mâché lobster follows the teapot, inexplicably labeled Freedom's crustacean. It moves jerkily, its claws operated by two boys clearly enjoying themselves far too much. The symbolism is hazy. The commitment absolute. You pass a trio of fiddlers marching backward while playing over the water to Charlie, even though no one seems to know who Charlie is or whether he deserves this serenade. A man with a drum tied to his chest stumbles into a pothole, recovers, and salutes a confused dog. The eulogies begin not at the end, but sprinkled throughout the parade like a trail of mildly inspiring breadcrumbs. First is a small platform where a local shopkeeper stands beside a potted fern and declares, "The teapot reminded us to look up. Not just for signs, but for meaning." The fern topples during applause. He continues without noticing. Further along, a seamstress stands beside a banner reading stitches for Spouty, delivering a poem that rhymes gleam with steam and then, questionably, esteem. Someone claps so hard they drop their cornmeal muffin. You pass a float decorated like a tavern interior, complete with actors pretending to drink patriotically. One of them winks at you and raises an empty tankard. To our beloved kettle, the first and only teapot to hold a city's attention longer than a mayoral scandal. Then comes the part no one saw coming. A children's choir, 32 strong, all dressed in matching bonnets and tunics, is wheeled into the parade on a small flatbed wagon. They are supposed to sing a custom hymn, "Steam us to freedom, O pot of the people." The problem? No one told them it was around. They begin at different times, in different keys, and one boy, clearly panicking, starts singing Yankee Doodle instead. The conductor tries valiantly to regain control. A girl faints into her neighbor's shoulder. A second boy drops his sheet music and sings boldly in gibberish. The result is a sound rarely heard in nature, a mixture of ambition, harmony, and spiritual distress. Still, the crowd applauds wildly, because how can you not? It's Boston. And that teapot has now become everyone's grand, slightly ridiculous aunt, overdressed, overlarge, and impossible not to love. At the halfway mark, the parade halts briefly for public reflection. A moment where people are encouraged to share their memories of the teapot from a specially designated platform. A shy teenage girl steps up first, gripping the edge of the lectern. "I used to meet my friends under the teapot after school. We'd sit on the steps and share licorice and stories. It felt like a landmark, but also, like it was ours." A man follows, more boisterous. "I used to walk past it every morning on the way to work. For years. I used to say, 'Good morning, Spout,' like an idiot. Then one day I stopped. I don't know why. Maybe it's good we're doing this. Reminds us to greet things again." The crowd nods. A slow chant begins, soft, then stronger. "Thank you, teapot. Thank you, teapot." Even you find yourself murmuring along. Not because you're particularly moved, but because somehow, this absurd object, this oversized hunk of tin once bolted over a tea shop, has become a mirror. It reflects everyone's memories, big and small, important or entirely pointless. You realize, it's not about what the teapot meant when it was built. It's about what it means now. And right now, it means togetherness. It means laughter. It means awkward songs and janky parades and papier-mâché lobsters. The parade resumes. The final stretch winds down toward the harbor again, where a temporary stage awaits for the last rites of the kettle. The crowd flows behind it, loose and chatty now, like everyone's leaving a wedding reception slightly tipsy on nostalgia and weak cider. You take one last look at the teapot as it turns the final corner. The sunlight glances off its weathered lid. Its bunting flutters. The horses snort in unison. And for one surreal second, you could swear it actually glows. Boston, you think, you strange and wonderful city. You've given a funeral to a teapot, and somehow made it feel like a coronation. You trailed the tail end of the parade, walking slowly now, as if the ceremony's momentum is easing into a final glide. Ahead, the harbor comes back into view, framed by weathered warehouses and gulls wheeling overhead like impatient ushers waiting to close the sky. The stage has been reassembled from yesterday's ceremonial steep, but the vibe now is quieter, more solemn, at least in theory. A wooden podium sits at the center, draped with a faded American flag and flanked by two dramatically drooping ferns. The teapot, freshly repositioned on the dock, sits in profile, its spout angled just enough to seem pensive. If a piece of cookware could sigh, this one would. The crowd gathers once more, though you sense they're nearing their emotional saturation point. People murmur politely. Someone hands out damp programs with a schedule of speakers. You skim it. 5 names. All prominent locals. 2 newspaper editors, a retired alderman, a history teacher, and a tea shop owner who seems to be moonlighting as a philosopher. The first speaker, a man with a mustache you could store secrets in, steps forward and clears his throat like he's announcing a trial. Ladies and gentlemen, he begins, today we commit to memory the image of this beloved kettle, this vessel of liberty and irony, this steel sentinel of the colonial spirit. He pauses for effect. The audience blinks in unison. We are gathered here not merely to say goodbye to an object, he continues, but to honor what it represented, resilience, commerce, and slightly dangerous signage. Let it be known that this teapot poured more than imagination, it poured unity into the cup of our city. It's unclear whether this metaphor works, but it earns a small smattering of claps. Someone sneezes into their elbow. The speaker bows, then exits with a slight misstep that nearly knocks over a fern. The fern, to its credit, holds the line. Next up is a woman in a tightly laced bodice who identifies herself as an educator, an amateur beverage folklorist. You're not sure whether to brace yourself or take notes. She begins, from the Andes to the Alps, tea has always symbolized more than flavor. It is the drink of revolution, of contemplation, of digestion. She launches into a brisk recounting of the global tea trade, punctuated with lines like, in Sri Lanka, they whisper to the leaves, and Sincha has memory, if steeped correctly. You drift momentarily, watching a small child try to poke the teapot's will with a stick before being gently tackled by their guardian. When you tune back in, she's wrapping up, and now, as this vessel departs its stage, we sip one last metaphor. And swallow it bravely. There's a pause. Someone in the back coughs loudly. The crowd applauds with the careful politeness of people unsure if they just witnessed art or a minor breakdown. Then comes the retired alderman. He climbs the steps with practiced slowness, looking every bit the part of a man who once held opinions about the height of street lamps and the curvature of curbs. He begins without preamble. I voted against this teapot. That's right. I did. The crowd straightens. I thought it was unnecessary. I thought it would fall. I thought it would become a magnet for pigeons and lawsuits. A beat. Then I was wrong. Murmurs of approval ripple like a breeze across a pond. I never imagined it'd become this. A part of us. A landmark. A running joke. An occasional umbrella. You don't get to choose what becomes important. Sometimes the city chooses for you. Now the clapping is genuine. I still think it was ugly, he adds. But so am I, and people still invite me to dinner. The laughter is soft but real. Even the teapot seems to gleam a little warmer in the sun. After him comes the tea shop owner, a young woman in a corduroy vest and spectacles the size of coasters. She holds a teacup in both hands and speaks slowly. Let's not pretend this was ever about the teapot itself. It wasn't. It was about what we needed it to be. Some needed it to remember history. Others needed it to forget their errands for a second. Some just liked that it made tourists stop and say, "What is that?" She sips from the cup. Tea is slow. That's its secret. It forces us to pause. And I think, oddly enough, this teapot did the same. She smiles. I'm not going to pour this out dramatically or cry or anything like that. I'm just going to sit it down here. She places the cup at the base of the teapot's platform. And let it cool with the rest of us. A long pause. The wind picks up, carrying a strand of bunting across the stage before it's quietly stepped on by the stagehand. The final speaker, a columnist for one of Boston's oldest papers, doesn't bother approaching the podium. He stays at the front row, voice gravelly, arms folded. I once wrote an editorial saying the teapot was the worst kind of nostalgia, hollow, oversized, and smug. I meant it. The crowd stiffens. But I was wrong, too. Because here we are, wasting a perfectly nice day eulogizing a thing that never brewed a drop of anything, and somehow, it feels right. He turns slightly, glancing at the teapot. I never liked it. Still don't. But I'm going to miss it. And with that, the speeches end. There's no grand finale. No cannon this time. Just silence and wind and the faint sound of gulls discussing sandwich theft in the distance. People begin to rise. Slowly. Quietly. You watch as they approach the teapot one by one, laying down small offerings. A button, a tea bag, a folded letter, a carved wooden spoon. Someone ties a ribbon to the handle. A child leaves behind a drawing, stick figures and a giant lumpy teapot with goodnight tea written in bold crayon. It is, somehow, perfect. You step forward yourself. You don't have anything dramatic to give. So you place your hand on the base of the platform. Just for a second. The metal is warm from the sun. Solid. Real. And full of every story it didn't ask to carry. You wake to the soft tolling of bells, morning bells, slow and uncertain, as if even they aren't quite sure why they're ringing. It's the final day of the farewell. And improbably it's the children's turn. You trudge back to the square, where bleachers have been assembled overnight around a temporary stage. It's smaller than yesterday's, narrower, and decorated with school banners and strings of paper teacups. You spot a sign swinging gently in the breeze, Youth in Harmony, a melodic goodbye. You can't decide if it sounds sweet or foreboding. Dozens of schoolchildren mill about in itchy uniforms, some in old-fashioned sashes and boots, others in ill-fitting ruffles and bonnets. You hear a teacher already pleading softly, "No, Harold, the triangle is not a weapon." Harold seems unconvinced. A small brass band has assembled off to the left. They tune with the determined chaos of youth, producing notes that flirt with melody but never quite marry it. The conductor, a lanky man with wild hair and a baton that may once have been a knitting needle, steps up to the podium with the quiet gravitas of someone who has already accepted what's about to happen. You look out at the crowd. Mostly parents. Some neighbors. A few hardened teapot mourners with folded arms and skeptical expressions. The kind of audience that wants to be touched, but not too hard. Then, with the first clear tap of the conductor's baton, the children's choir launches into their opening number, The Teapot of Boston. It starts off strong. 1 or 2 verses in actual harmony, voices high and bright like the first whistle of a kettle. Then it happens. Midway through the second chorus, someone loses the key. Possibly several someones. A boy in the front row sings confidently in a register only dogs should hear. 2 girls on the left side are a full measure behind, locked in their own determined tempo. A triangle crashes at random, completely divorced from any known beat. From the edge of the bleachers, a music teacher visibly winces, mouthing "no, no, no" in time with the unfolding disarray. And then, a shriek. A soloist, no more than 9, bravely steps forward for her verse. But the moment she opens her mouth, her hat slips over her eyes. She lets out a high-pitched sound of surprise, drops her lyric sheet, and topples forward into the choir. Chaos blooms. 1 student faints. A second, startled by the commotion, begins sobbing. A third yells she fell into the kettle. Which isn't accurate but is now etched forever in the city's memory. Parents leap from their seats. A teacher runs on stage with the speed and precision of someone who's rescued many a musical before. The conductor, to his credit, tries to carry on, flapping his arms like a desperate gull trying to regain altitude. The band follows, sort of, but it's hopeless. The song collapses. It ends not with a note, but with the collective sound of confusion, gasps, murmurs, and one distinct snort of laughter from the back row. You brace for disappointment. But instead, something magical happens. The audience, faced with the most adorably doomed performance they've ever seen, rises to their feet. A full standing ovation. Parents weep. Neighbors cheer. Someone throws a carnation. One man starts chanting, "Spout! Spout! Spout!" And astonishingly, others join in. The children recover. They bow. Some smile. Some burst into tears. One boy salutes the teapot like it just awarded him a medal. And the teapot? Still there watching. If it could smirk, it might. You find yourself grinning. Not because it was good, but because it wasn't. Because somehow, this messy, chaotic burst of effort felt more real than all the eulogies in the world. Boston isn't a city known for tidy endings. Its greatness lies not in polish, but in persistence. And this performance, bizarre, brave, beautiful in its collapse, fit the Teapot perfectly. After the music, the children gather near the platform. One of the teachers announces, "We have a special presentation." A group of students steps forward, carrying a patchwork banner. Across the cloth, stitched in uneven but heartfelt letters, it reads, "Thank you for pouring memories into our city." The crowd sighs as one. Even the skeptics go quiet. A young boy places a handwritten card at the base of the teapot. "You were funny," it reads. "You were big. I liked how you looked sad but still tried." You feel your throat catch unexpectedly. You don't hear what the teacher says next. You're too busy watching the moment crystallize, realizing that somewhere along the way, this giant, impractical object became a friend to the city. A landmark not of history, but of emotion. A shape you looked up at. A bit of continuity in a world that keeps boiling over. Historians still argue whether objects like this deserve mourning. Whether nostalgia is useful, or just sugar-coated resistance to progress. Whether rituals around kitsch cross the line into unearned reverence. But today, there's no debate. Not here. Not in this little square full of off-key kids and misty-eyed grown-ups, and a kettle-shaped hole waiting to form in the skyline. The teacher announces a final group photo. The children arrange themselves around the platform. One child climbs halfway up the steps and holds up a sign, "Say TA." Click. Flash. A memory captured forever in sepia laughter. You linger a while after the crowd disperses. The teapot is quiet again. Somehow smaller without the ceremony, and yet more significant. A city worker walks past, carrying a ladder and a clipboard. "Taking it down tomorrow," he says, nodding toward it. "Early. Before traffic. Want it gone before the city wakes up." You nod. "Gonna be weird," he adds. "I mean, what do we even look up at now?" He keeps walking. You stay behind. Eventually, you press your palm gently to the teapot one last time. The metal is cool now. Not sad. Not proud. Just still. You smile. Then you walk away. The night before the removal, the city seems to hold its breath. You find yourself drawn once more to the square, not out of obligation, but from a strange pull in your chest, the kind that makes you revisit the place where something once happened, even if that something wasn't yours. The crowd has thinned. The last of the commemorative ribbon has wilted in the damp air, and most of the confetti has turned to pulp in the gutters. But the teapot remains still perched on its barge, looming over the dock like a sleeping sentinel. Only tonight something feels off. A group of workers stands nearby, exchanging hushed words and nervous glances at the teapot. A rope lies slack on the cobblestones. One of the wheels seems to have slipped out of alignment. And then you hear it, a creak, sharp and metallic, followed by the unmistakable thunk of shifting weight. The teapot wobbles. Not much. Just enough to make everyone freeze. One worker mutters, "It's not supposed to do that." Another replies, "It's the tide. Or the axle. Or the something." They rush to stabilize the platform, tightening the ropes, checking the blocks beneath the wheels. A city official appears, clipboard in hand, sweating despite the chill. "Was it jostled?" he asks. "Is the deck warped? Has anyone been near it?" He's asking too many questions to people with too few answers. You step back, watching. There's no panic yet, but tension radiates through the crew like ripples from a pebble dropped in a full teacup. One man crawls under the platform with a lantern. Another tests the stability of the rear axle with his foot, which earns a sharp "don't do that" from a supervisor. And then it happens. A low groan, deep, wooden, unmistakable. The crowd, what little remains, gasps. The platform tilts ever so slightly forward. A child nearby points. "It's gonna tip." No one moves. Then the left rear wheel, swollen with moisture, softened. One worker lets out a slow, ragged breath. Another sits down right where he is, blinking as if he's just survived a duel with an elephant. A seagull lands on the spout and lets out a squawk of pure disrespect. Eventually, someone speaks. "That's it," says the official with the clipboard. "We're ending it now." "What about the mourning ceremony?" someone asks. "No mourning," he says. "No procession. No photos. No speeches. We're taking it down tonight before we lose it, or someone." The workers nod. Some relieved, some disappointed. A few linger near the base, touching the supports like it's a creature that might bite. You stand off to the side, heart still thudding, watching as the crew brings out long beams, steel pulleys, and heavy canvas. The disassembly is underway. Quietly. Carefully. Like a secret. There's no fanfare now. No lanterns. No songs. Just groaning metal, whispered orders, and the occasional curse as bolts refuse to turn. A few curious onlookers arrive, drawn by the commotion. They watch from the shadows, clutching their coats, murmuring, "Is this it? And so soon?" A woman nearby wipes her eyes, though whether it's grief or wind, you can't tell. You move in closer. Piece by piece, the teapot is unbuilt. First goes the bunting, soaked and limp. Then the ornamental trim, pried off with quiet reverence. The handle is detached next, lowered by rope, and laid gently on a canvas sheet like a sacred relic. The lid follows, still dented from years of bird landings, and is passed down hand to hand until it rests on a crate, crooked and dignified. And then, the spout. Two workers climb onto the base, tools in hand. The bolts screech. The spout wobbles. Then, with a final creak, it breaks free. As it's lowered, a hush falls again. Not a moment of silence. Just a shared awareness that something is ending. Something odd and precious and entirely unnecessary, but still ending. A boy nearby whispers, "Will they put it back together?" His mother shakes her head. "Maybe. Somewhere. But not here." Historians still argue whether dismantling such objects diminishes their meaning or preserves it. Whether artifacts deserve to fade naturally or be taken apart and boxed like memories in an attic. Tonight there's no debate. Just necessity. And rain. Yes, now it's raining. Softly, without warning. A light drizzle that slicks the cobblestones and beads on the metal like reluctant tears. The workers pull up their collars. The last few observers pull down their hats. The rain makes the teapot glisten, what's left of it. The base remains, a shell without spout, without lid, without handle. Just a body. Tired. Hollow. Real. You step forward one last time. The workers don't stop you. You rest your hand on what remains, on the curved belly of a symbol you never knew you'd care about. It's warm still. Not from sun, but from the memory of attention. You whisper, "Thank you." And then you step back. A tarp is pulled over the remnants. Ropes secured. Wheels checked again, this time without incident. And then, with quiet efficiency, the wagon rolls away, back toward a warehouse, or a yard, or some anonymous storage space where history goes when no one's looking. There's no one left to cheer. No music. No crowd. Just a wet street. An empty platform. And the echo of what was nearly a disaster, but instead became a final, strange grace note. The teapot is gone. The next morning, the square is startling in its stillness. Boston, it seems, has already moved on. Or at least, it's trying to. But you notice a subtle shift as you walk the early streets. Something quieter than grief, but deeper than disinterest. The vendors, normally loud and brisk with their sales pitches, are a little softer today. Conversations take longer. People look up more. They glance at the sky, or at nothing, and you know they're looking for it. That absurd, hanging kettle that used to hover above Court Street like a metallic thought bubble. And in its place? Opportunity. Because with the teapot gone, the space it left behind is already becoming sacred in the most Bostonian way possible, through food and merchandise. The street vendors are out in full force. The first one you see is a squat man with a cart labeled Spouty Bites. He's selling small pastries shaped like teapots, complete with sugary handles and a jam-filled spout. You ask what's inside. He grins. Plum? Maybe. Fig? Possibly. Patriotism? Definitely. Next to him is a woman selling miniature pewter charms, tiny replicas of the giant teapot, made from authentic symbolic tin, whatever that means. She leans in close. Limited run, she whispers. 1 per customer. Unless you're a descendant of someone who dumped tea in the harbor, then you get 2. Further down, a boy of no more than 12 waves a handmade sign. Spout stickers. 5 cents. Drawn by me. You buy 1. It's misshapen and delightful. The spout looks like a nose. You love it immediately. You pass a woman hawking a Liberty blend of loose-leaf tea. It's got mint, thyme, and a little cinnamon bark, just like the rebels might have drunk if they hadn't been busy tossing crates. You're skeptical, but you buy a bag anyway. For history. Even the pretzel vendor has gotten in on it. Revolutionary knots, he calls them. Like a protest you can chew on. You take 1. It's salty, warm, and shaped, very loosely, like the handle of a teapot mid-swoon. It hits you, somewhere between bites, that this might be the true aftermath of mourning in Boston. Not flowers and silence, but snacks and souvenirs. A way to hold onto the absurd with both hands and ask, would you like mustard with your memory? Historians still argue whether souvenir culture cheapens history or preserves it. Whether a teapot charm can hold the same weight as a museum plaque. Whether commemorative muffins are reverent, or just well-timed carbohydrates. But here, in this square, it all feels right. Because in Boston, commemoration is a marketplace. You stroll past a table offering tea bag sachets for emotional steeping. Another selling ink drawings of the parade, one of which includes the papier-mâché lobster wearing a powdered wig, which definitely never happened, but you respect the artistic license. And then you reach the souvenir vendor who has gone a step further. He's set up a booth with a hand-painted sign, scrap from the real spout. You raise an eyebrow. Genuine material, he insists. Got a cousin who works with the crew. Let me keep a few shavings, a rivet or 2. Nothing structural. All legit. Look! He holds out a small metal shard, slightly curved, about the size of a thumb. It could be from the teapot. Or a stovepipe. Or a poorly manufactured bucket. It doesn't matter. Because people are lining up. They pay, they nod reverently, and they walk away with tiny cloth pouches holding bits of what may or may not be history, but feel like it. You overhear one man say, I'm going to frame it. Right next to the picture of my great-grandmother, and the Liberty Bell eraser she bought in Philadelphia. Another says, I'll pass mine down. My kid doesn't get it yet. But someday he will. You watch as no one really knows if these scraps are real. If the pewter charms are genuine replicas. If the pastries truly channel the colonial palate. But meaning isn't always about fact. Sometimes it's about want. The need to carry a moment forward in any way you can, be it through a rivet or a refrigerator magnet. A man selling tea cozies shaped like the teapot yells out, don't let history cool too fast. You almost applaud. You pass a bookstore with a chalkboard outside. It reads, Teapot Funeral, the poems, the pamphlets, the madness. Inside, a table is piled high with newly printed chapbooks, anthologies of essays, odes, and reflections on the spout. You flip through one. A line catches your eye. We are not steeped by accident, but by choice. Outside, a busker is playing a sad rendition of I'm a Little Teapot on a harmonica. Slowly. Mournfully. A man tosses him a coin and wipes his eyes. You're not sure if it's irony or sincerity anymore. You suspect it's both. You sit on a bench for a while, just watching. The teapot is gone. But the idea of it is still here, in drawings, in pastry dough, in scrap metal and folk songs. In memory, yes, but also in cash boxes and canvas tote bags with pour one out printed in tasteful navy ink. And maybe that's okay. Because not everyone mourns with tears. Some mourn with creativity. With commerce. With a healthy dose of sarcasm and a commemorative napkin set. You pull your own teapot-shaped sticker from your coat pocket and run your thumb over it. Crooked. Smudged. Perfect. A girl passing by looks at it and smiles. You went to the parade? You nod. I heard the choir fainted. You nod again. They did. And a papier-mâché lobster tried to join in. Her eyes widen. I wish I'd been there. You smile. You kind of still are. Because that's the real legacy of Boston's farewell to its ridiculous, beloved kettle. It wasn't just an event, it was a story, one now embedded into the city's folds like tea stains on a favorite shirt. Imperfect. Unwashable. Deeply personal. The vendors begin to pack up. The harmonica fades. The last of the spouty bites are boxed up and loaded into a cart. And you head home, your sticker in your pocket, your heart strangely full. You return home that evening, sticker still in hand, half-melted pastry tucked in your coat pocket, and a faint buzz in your ears that's either leftover harmonica or the sound of a city refusing to let go of a joke that became something else. But later that night, long after the vendors have folded up their carts and the harmonica man has found a barstool to nestle into, something strange happens. You step out for air, drawn by a quiet thrum you can't quite name, and find yourself walking back toward the site where the teapot once stood. The square is empty, dark, peaceful. But not entirely abandoned. A small crowd has gathered near the curb. You count maybe 15 people, all standing still, watching something at their feet. You drift closer. They're looking at scrap. Literally, scrap. Scattered on the cobblestones like breadcrumbs from an industrial fairy tale are bits of twisted metal, lengths of rusted wire, bolts that probably once held something significant together. The remains, or at least the rumors of them. One man kneels down and picks up a warped sliver of iron. From the base, maybe? He says. A woman with a bonnet too grand for this time of night replies, could be from the hinge. I heard the lid was stubborn to remove. You stand beside them, unsure whether to join the search or just bear witness. Some people are simply watching. Others are carefully collecting, inspecting, weighing the pieces in their palms like relics or clues from a half-forgotten dream. A team nearby holds up a flattened rivet and says reverently, I think this was part of the spout. He drops it in his pocket with the satisfied air of someone who's just inherited a fortune in symbolism. And that's when the rush begins. Word spreads fast in this city, especially when it's about things that aren't supposed to matter. By morning, the souvenir scavengers have multiplied. The alleyways and gutters around the old Teapot site fill with curious seekers, amateur collectors, sentimental hoarders. People crawl under wagons, inspect drain covers, lift loose bricks. Everyone wants a piece. Everyone wants a fragment of the kettle that brought them all outside themselves, if only for a few peculiar days. A man sets up a blanket to display his haul, 2 washers, a hinge pin, and something that might be a spout, cap, or a highly corroded thimble. He labels them with a stub of chalk, left flange, possibly handle, unidentified but important. Someone offers him 5 cents for the lot. He declines. These are going to my son. Another woman walks away cradling a scrap of twisted tin in a handkerchief. You overhear her whispering to it, you were part of something. There are maps now, crudely drawn, photocopied, passed from hand to hand. Circles mark likely drop sites, where bolts fell, and where a man sneezed and something rolled into a drain. You take one. It folds out like a scavenger's treasure map, complete with smudged footprints and a legend that includes mystery scrap and possible tea ghost. Historians still argue whether these scavenged relics are truly from the teapot or just random urban debris. And honestly, it doesn't matter. Because belief has overtaken truth. The line between artifact and object has blurred. A scrap of tin is a vessel now, not for tea, but for meaning. For memory. For mischief. Someone sets up a stand called Teapot DNA testing. A joke, surely, but people pay anyway. He hands back tiny slips of paper reading things like 93% handle and spout lineage uncertain. You suspect he's making it all up, but again, no one cares. There are arguments too, of course. One man accuses another of stealing his bolt. A woman insists her fragment is the last original corner bracket, and refuses to hand it over even after being offered a full silver dollar. A fight almost breaks out over a curved shard shaped vaguely like a mustache. It's diffused only when someone starts singing My Country, 'Tis of Thee at full volume. People forget what they were mad about. Some even join in. You wander through the crowd, watching it all unfold. This is no longer mourning. It's a treasure hunt. A memory chase. A way to say, I was there, without ever needing to prove it. Even kids are involved. One small girl tugs on your sleeve. Want to see my spout bits? She asks. She opens a felt pouch. Inside are 3 pieces of glittered cardboard and a thumbtack. You nod solemnly. Those are excellent. She beams. I'm going to build it again someday. A boy nearby holds up a bent fork. Mine's part of the handle, he says. No one questions it. Somehow, impossibly, the teardown has made the teapot multiply. It has exploded into 1,000 souvenirs, scattered like seeds across the city's jacket pockets, windowsills, and nightstands. It no longer exists in one place, but in many. A man passes by, wearing a vest adorned with scrap pieces. It's wearable memory, he says. Kettle couture. You nod. Of course it is. You spot the bookstore from earlier. The chalkboard now reads, The Scraps Speak, Teapot Remnants and the Stories They Tell. Inside, people are already writing essays about their finds. One woman reads aloud a piece titled Rust on My Fingertips, Hope in My Heart. Another simply shows her bolt and says it squeaked when I picked it up. That was its goodbye. And even now, hours later, the search continues. People with flashlights comb the streets. A city worker stands nearby, arms crossed. We were gonna sweep it up, he says. Then someone said, let him have it. So we did. You thank him. He shrugs. It's Boston. We get weird about stuff. And you realize this is the last act of the farewell. Not the parade. Not the speeches. Not even the children's choir collapse. This scattering of meaning. This desperate, joyful insistence that an object once loved must now be carried, fragmented, imperfect, and wholly imagined. You reach down and pick up a flat disc of metal half buried in a crack. It might be a washer. It might be nothing. But to you, it's a piece of the story now. The newspapers the next morning are, predictably, unhinged. You pull a copy from the stack outside the corner cafe, still warm from the press and dusted faintly with flour. The headline blares in dramatic serif. Teapot and no more, city grieves, vendors rejoice, scrap frenzy ongoing. You sit down with a cup of oversteeped breakfast tea and flip through the pages. It's all here, the scavenging, the vigil, the children's collapse, the teapot's near dunking. Each detail inflated slightly larger than life, like someone grabbed the truth and politely stuffed it with narrative seasoning. There's a full spread on page 2 featuring a dozen citizens holding up their finds: washers, tin curls, bolts, suspiciously un-teapot-looking scraps. One man cradles what appears to be a metal shoehorn. The caption reads, "Part of the hinge?" You grin. Then there's the op-eds. The first one, from the Boston Evening Ledger, is swooning and syrupy, a town's heart, steeped and spilled. It opens with, "In the hollow of a vessel that never poured, we found something else, each other." It's too sentimental by half, but you keep reading anyway. The next, from the North End Chronicle, is more skeptical. Boil over. Have we lost our civic minds? The columnist asks, have we mistaken marketing for memory? Is this a celebration of community or a hallucination brought on by second-hand nostalgia and weak herbal tea? He does have a point. And yet, just 2 pages later, another writer rebuttals with, yes, and it was worth every crumb. The article is accompanied by a photo of yesterday's pretzels. But it's the smaller stories that grab your heart. The little sidebars. A child's drawing of the teapot published with the title Spouty in Heaven. A photo of a couple holding hands under the empty sky where the teapot once hung. A note scribbled by someone anonymous and left on the platform's last bolt. I didn't know I cared until it left. You fold the paper and slide it into your coat pocket, knowing you'll reread it again later, not for news, but for something else, something closer to comfort. Out in the square, the space still echoes. Not literally, but in the way places do when they're suddenly missing something. The teapot had weight, not just in metal, but in memory. Its absence leaves a lopsidedness in the air. But something else is already bubbling. An artist has set up a canvas on an easel right in the middle of the cobblestones. She's painting a large, colorful mural of the teapot, except in her version, it has wings. It flew away, she tells a passerby. That's how I'm choosing to remember it. Across the street, someone's chalked "Thank you" spout in 6-foot letters. Tourists take pictures with it, unsure why, but sensing it matters. You turn down an alley and discover a small crowd gathered around the man who's building something. It's a sculpture. Not of the teapot, but of its shadow. Welded rebar, curved lines of painted wood, and dangling fragments suspended from fishing line. It casts a perfect kettle-shaped silhouette if you stand in the right spot, just after 4 p.m., he says, when the light hits it right. Is it permanent? Someone asks. Nah, he shrugs. Nothing is. A nearby shop has renamed itself the Steep House. They're now offering a new drink called the Spout Special, Earl Grey with a splash of cider and a candied orange peel. The flavor isn't great, but the name earns nods of approval. The city's official newsletter, yes, Boston has one, announces a new art installation initiative titled Objects of Civic Memory. The mayor's office says it's inspired by recent public passion for industrial folk relics. Translation: more weird stuff might be honored soon. You imagine a future where other oddities are enshrined. A broken lamppost. A favorite stoop. The pigeon who always perches above the hardware store sign and poops on no one but lawyers. And honestly, you're okay with that. Because cities aren't just their monuments. They're the moments that sneak up on you, the signs you ignore for years, then miss immediately once they're gone. Cities are collections of the little things that, over time, start meaning everything. Historians still argue whether this kind of spontaneous civic affection dilutes the importance of official landmarks. But here in Boston, a city as stubborn as it is poetic, you sense that it doesn't care about categories. It cares about stories. About the objects that hold them. Even if they're absurd. Especially if they're absurd. Later in the day, a group of school kids returns to the square. They've drawn a large map of the original Teapot parade route using sidewalk chalk. Little teacup icons mark where things happened. Here, choir disaster. Here, papier-mâché lobster debut. Here, the Leaf of Liberty poem everyone sort of regretted. They trace the route in giggles and cartwheels. It's not an official monument. It'll wash away with the next rain. But it matters now. You sit on the edge of the planter near where the teapot once stood. A breeze rolls through. It's cooler now, tinged with salt and something that feels like calm. A man walking by stops, looks up, and says aloud, "I keep forgetting it's not there." You nod. "I always used it to find my bearings," he adds. "Like turn left at the giant teapot. Now I'll just guess." He chuckles and moves on. A dog trots up to the empty space, sniffs once, then flops down and naps where the wheel marks faded. You smile. Another woman sits beside you and unwraps a sandwich. She takes a bite and says, mouth full, "I hope they don't replace it with something boring. Like a statue of someone no one likes." You agree. Then she says, "But I also kinda hope they don't replace it at all." That makes you pause. Because maybe this is better. The empty space. The sky where the kettle used to hang. The pause in the middle of the block that makes people look up. Maybe that's the truest tribute. A reminder that not everything needs to be filled. That sometimes, letting something go, after holding it, loving it, naming it, painting it, commemorating it in song and sticker, is enough. You lean back. Close your eyes. Picture it there, still hanging. And for a moment it is. It's been a week. A whole 7 days since Boston laid its beloved aluminum kettle to rest, and still, you catch yourself turning corners and expecting to see it. Like the ghost of a funny friend who never quite knew when to leave the party. You imagine it floating above the square, tethered to memory instead of bolts, whispering in a tinny voice steeped in peace. Others feel. You overhear a barista muttering, "The skyline looks naked," as she froths milk. A tour guide tells his group, "That empty patch of sky. That used to be home to the city's weirdest compass." And every other cafe suddenly has some version of a farewell spout latte, served in mugs shaped like nothing in particular, but named with great flair. One of the local libraries has launched a Teapot archive. You stop by, unsure what to expect. What you find is equal parts touching and completely unhinged. There are photos, hundreds of them, printed from old phones, scanned from newspaper clippings, pulled from storage boxes labeled "Why did I keep this?" There's a framed photo of a wedding party smiling beneath the teapot. A Christmas card featuring a toddler in front of it, labeled "Our Little Earl Grey." Someone has even contributed a dramatic oil painting titled "Liberty Pours On." It features the teapot floating above the harbor like an apocalyptic UFO, beaming light onto the Old North Church. The staff at the archive, a trio of earnest grad students with clipboards and excellent sweaters, have also been collecting stories. Oral histories, they call them, though most are written on sticky notes or napkins. One reads, "I met my wife beneath the spout. She was lost. I was bored. We've been talking ever since." Another simply says, "I told my dad it was stupid. Then we went every Saturday." You contribute your own. A paragraph. Nothing dramatic. Just that you were there. That you stood with it. That it made you feel like a part of something, even if you weren't sure what. They thank you with more sincerity than the moment deserves. You ask where the teapot is now. One of the archivists, a woman with a small tattoo of a spoon on her wrist, says softly, "Storage. Last we heard." "Will it be displayed again?" She shrugs. "No plans. But plans change." You nod. "And that's the other thing, the rumors. They're everywhere now. One man swears he saw city workers wheeling the pieces into a back door at the Museum of Industry. Another says it's been sold to a private collector who wants to turn it into a hot tub. A child claims she saw the spout in a dream, where it promised to return when Boston needed it most. A blogger posts GPS coordinates to a warehouse across the river. People go. All they find is a stack of old pizza ovens and a raccoon that's become something of a local mascot. Historians still argue whether the kettle's disappearance is a tragedy or a triumph. Whether its removal adds weight to its legend or undermines it. Whether Boston's eccentricity has finally boiled over, or simply steeped long enough to become flavor. Some say it was always a joke. Others insist it was sacred. Most agree on one thing: they didn't expect to miss it. A few days later, you get a call from a friend. "You need to come to the park," they say. "Which park?" "The weird one. With the abstract statues that look like melted chess pieces." That narrows it down. You arrive just before dusk. At first, you don't see anything unusual. Kids on scooters. Someone doing Tai Chi under a tree. A couple walking a dog that appears to be wearing a cravat. Then you spot it. Near the center of the park, there's a new installation. It's not the teapot. Not really. But it's clearly inspired by it. A sweeping metal form, sleek, stylized, half spout, half skyline, rising out of a stone base shaped vaguely like a cup. There's no plaque. No explanation. Just an etching at the bottom that reads, "We were here. We poured what we had." People are gathered around it. Some taking selfies. Others just sitting quietly. A boy runs past and taps it like it's a lucky stone. An elderly woman rests her cane against it and smiles, and for a moment you forget that the original teapot was ever goofy, or rusty, or controversial. All you feel is warmth. Recognition. Echo. Because this This is not a replacement. It's a sequel. It's what happens when grief meets imagination. You sit on a bench, watching the sun dip behind the silhouette. The metal glows gold for a second before fading to blue. You think about the scraps. The parade. The crumbling choir. The harmonica. The kid who thought the spout winked at him. And then you remember something a speaker said at the ceremony. You don't get to choose what becomes important. Sometimes the city chooses for you. And Boston chose this. Not the kettle itself, but what it stirred. Community. Curiosity. Chaos. Heart. It's not just about looking up anymore. It's about remembering that you did. Later that evening, as you walk home past dim shop windows and tired street lamps, you notice something scrawled in chalk on a wall. Just 2 words. Pour again. You pause. Smile. Then keep walking. Because you know now, the kettle might be gone, but the story? The story's still steeping. You find yourself developing a sort of ritual in the days that follow. Each morning, after your usual shuffle through breakfast and before the rest of the city fully wakes, you walk back to the old Teapot Square. There's rarely anyone there now. The chalk has long since faded, the vendor carts have rolled elsewhere, and the last paper garland finally gave up and blew into the harbor. But something keeps pulling you in. Maybe it's muscle memory. Or maybe it's the quiet promise the square still makes to those who remember. Today, you're not alone. There's a man in a wrinkled coat standing exactly where the teapot's shadow used to fall. He's staring at the sky. Not in awe. Not in grief. Just expectant. You stand next to him for a while. Then he says, without looking at you, I thought it'd feel over by now. You nod. It kind of never does. He sighs. I didn't even like it, you know? Thought it was a waste of tin and a hazard to low-flying birds. But still, I miss it. You both watch the clouds for a while. Then, quietly, he says, I called it Harold. You glance at him. The teapot, he clarifies. I named it Harold. Don't know why. You smile. Good name, you say. He nods. He seemed like a herald. Later you find yourself wandering past a gallery you hadn't noticed before. The sign reads, Temporary Exhibit, Found Fragments, Collective Memory. You go in, expecting scrap metal and abstract statements. And you get both. But there's also something else. Someone's recreated the teapot. Not full size. Not exact. But close. It's made of cardboard, mirror shards, bits of actual tin, and what appears to be spoons, hundreds of them, overlapping like fish scales. Inside the belly of the thing is a screen looping footage from the parade, the funeral, and shaky handheld shots of the original kettle from years past. On the wall nearby, there's a guest book with a sign, Write Your Spout Memory. You read a few. I used to meet my mom under it every Sunday before we got bagels. After she passed, I still went. Just stood there and smiled. Didn't like it. Still cried when it came down. Go figure. Saw a pigeon fly straight into it once. Funniest thing I ever saw. Hope that pigeon's okay. You flip to a blank page and write. It made us look up. And then look at each other. The woman at the front desk smiles when you leave. She hands you a sticker shaped like a spout. A local school has launched a student essay contest titled What the Teapot Meant to Me. First prize is a certificate shaped like the lid. Second prize is a day off from gym. Third prize is one glorious sticker. Even the church bulletin board includes a line, Our prayers are with Harold the Kettle. Boston has fully committed to the bit. Or perhaps it's no longer a bit. Maybe it never was. Maybe it was always just a slow realization that loving a strange, useless thing brings people together faster than any statue of a general ever could. Historians still argue whether emotional investment in kitsch reflects deep societal longing or just mass hysteria with better typography. But the city doesn't argue. The city just adapts. By the week's end, people are already planning Teapot Day. It's not official, not yet. But you overhear a barista say, it's gotta be annual. Parade, cookies, awkward speeches, the whole thing. Her coworker nods. Maybe we all wear kettle hats. A man down the street has launched a Kickstarter to build a miniature replica, one that would sit atop a food truck serving revolutionary-themed dumplings. Someone posts on the community board, "Who's up for a teapot walking tour? Even if we're just pointing at places it once passed?" Someone else replies, "Count me in." We'll walk slow, steep in the memories. You go to sleep that night with the sound of kettle whistles playing softly through your open window, someone's ambient recording, posted online and now oddly popular. It's gentle, comforting, like a warm breath you didn't know you needed. You dream of it, not the real one, but something dreamier. A floating kettle that sails over the rooftops, trailing ribbons of steam and memory, whistling softly as it drifts above crowds who wave and laugh and hold up their tiny metal fragments like lighthouses. And when you wake, you feel it again, that absurd, persistent glow. It's not about the kettle anymore. It's about the way a city leaned into the ridiculous and came out feeling more real. About how something so unimportant became so incredibly important. You take a long walk through the neighborhood. There's a child chalking a teapot on the sidewalk. She's drawing it sideways, mid-tip, with little waves of steam curling into hearts. You pause. She looks up. "It's for him," she says. "Harold?" you ask. She grins. "No. Spouty." You laugh. "Of course." Across the street, someone's hung a banner over their porch, "We steep together." It's silly. It's sweet. It's exactly right. Because maybe, just maybe, the best monuments aren't built to last. Maybe the most meaningful ones are those that come and go, appear, surprise you, warm you, and vanish before they wear out their welcome. Like steam. Like song. Like Harold the Kettle. You keep walking. You don't need a destination. Because everywhere you go now, he's with you. In stickers. In scraps. In smiles. And the sky? Still looks just a little bit shaped like a spout. It's early spring now, the kind that smells faintly of mud and blooming promise. Boston is stretching back to life, the way cities do after long, sleepy winters, creaking awake with street sweepers, sidewalk saxophones, and fresh graffiti that insists someone out there still cares deeply about punctuation. You haven't been to the harbor in a while. But something draws you there today. Maybe it's curiosity. Or maybe it's just time. The air smells sharper near the water. Briny and bright, with that familiar undercurrent of fried food and distant ambition. You walk along the boardwalk, past the usual gulls staging their daily bread roll heists, past the statue of someone whose name you never learned, and then you stop. There it is. A shape. A new one. Not a teapot. Not exactly. It's a sculpture. A tall, arched structure built from repurposed dock wood and twisted metal. In the center, framed like an old photograph, hangs a circular panel made of burnished steel, stamped delicately with a single raised spout. Just the spout. No kettle. No handle. No lid. You stare at it for a while. It doesn't whistle. It doesn't pour. It just exists quietly, marking the spot where the teapot once floated like a gleaming, goofy beacon. Someone has tied a ribbon to the bottom corner of the frame. Faded blue. Weather-beaten. On it, scrawled in permanent marker, still steeping. People pass by. Some stop. Some don't. A child asks, "Was that the spaceship?" And her dad says, "Close enough." You sit on the edge of a nearby planter and watch as the harbor sparkles like a freshly polished coin. Boats drift lazily in and out. The breeze tugs gently at your sleeves. It feels good, like closure wrapped in sea air. But even here, the stories linger. A woman in a fleece vest stops beside you. "You see that thing last week?" she asks. You blink. Which thing? The guy who dressed up like the teapot and ran the Freedom Trail in full costume. You smile. "Please tell me there are photos." "Oh yeah? It made the news. He wore a silver colander as a hat. Said he was the spirit of the spout." You nod solemnly. "A true patriot." She laughs and walks on. A group of teens wanders past, sharing a playlist titled Teapot Energy. The song currently playing samples kettle whistles under a lo-fi beat. It's better than it should be. Someone skateboards by with a decal on the bottom of their board, a cartoon kettle mid-flight, trailing stars. You realize the teapot isn't fading. It's evolving. It's been painted on alley walls, stitched into patches, memed, theorized, and inserted into local legend like it always belonged there. A bar you walk past has rebranded entirely. Its new sign reads, "The Rusty Spout, Pours and Pints." You peek inside. Cozy. Dim. The taps have little ceramic lids. On the wall above the bar, someone's hung a bent piece of metal. You squint. It's either a fragment of the original teapot, or an old car bumper. You don't ask. You don't need to. Because it's not about truth anymore. Not really. It's about memory. Shared, reshaped, retold. Historians still argue whether the Boston Teapot funeral was a cultural milestone or a collective breakdown brought on by caffeine and nostalgia. But those arguments feel distant now, like echoing voices behind a closed door you're not in the mood to open. You remember that one line from a eulogy: "You don't get to choose what becomes important." And you wonder, what would have happened if no one had cared? If the giant kettle had simply been dismantled and hauled off without parade, without tears, without chalk tributes and pewter charms? Would the city have felt this changed? You think probably not. Because the power wasn't in the object, it was in the act of noticing it. Of choosing to care. Of coming together not over tragedy, but you don't take a photo. You don't tag it online. You just hold it in your head and keep walking. Your route takes you through the old parade path. You remember it like footprints in soft dirt, where the kids sang, where the spout almost tipped, where someone passed out free stickers and swore the kettle once glowed in moonlight. You reach the square again. Empty now. But not. Never empty. Because in your mind's eye, the kettle still hangs there. Gleaming. Unapologetic. Ridiculous. And wonderful. You sit on the edge of the curb, just for a moment. Let your eyes close. Let the noise of the city dull to a hum. And you imagine, just briefly, that the teapot leans down and says, "Thanks for noticing." Then you rise. You pat your coat pocket, still full of stickers, fragments, and nothing that matters but everything that does. You walk home. The skyline blurs behind you, but you don't need it to be sharp. You carry it now, in memory, in story, in scrap. In spout-shaped truth. Evening again. Weeks later now. The air is warmer, full of late spring buzz and the first real taste of summer's promise. Boston hums differently in this kind of light, like it's exhaling something it's been holding in all winter. And somehow, you know this is the last time you'll come back to the square for a while. You stroll past familiar storefronts, ones that had nothing to do with the teapot but now feel like they did, just because they stood nearby. The florist who arranged a dozen bouquet tea wreaths. The pizza place that renamed its personal size special the handle pie. Even the lamppost that wore a scarf for 3 days after the funeral, knitted by someone with feelings and far too much yarn. You pass by these quiet markers and know, even without signs, where the spout once pointed. Your body remembers the direction like a compass trained not on magnetic north, but on emotional gravity. There are fewer trinkets now. The stickers are peeling. The chalk's all washed away. The makeshift scrap market has moved on to some new local obsession, likely involving ducks or ghosts or both. But the feeling? It lingers. You stop in the center of the square, where it once loomed, and you try not to picture it. Just stand there and let the absence wash over you. It doesn't feel hollow anymore. It feels open. Freeing, almost. Like a space made for pause. Like a comma in the middle of the city's sentence. You sit for a while, cross-legged on the concrete. The city swells around you, bikes rattling past, a busker nearby attempting a mournful version of Yankee Doodle on a melodica, and the scent of scallion pancakes floating in from a food truck parked too close to a fire hydrant. And in the lull you reflect. This wasn't really about tea, or tourism, or even tradition. It was about how something pointless became precious. How a teapot no one needed turned into a compass, a mirror, a soft boiling point where people met each other without agenda, without side-eye, without trying too hard to be profound. And isn't that what cities are built on? Not statues of great men, but quiet corners and weird landmarks. Not just war memorials and plaques, but benches where lovers once kissed, diners that only serve breakfast until 2 o'clock, and yes, enormous steel teapots that everyone pretended to hate until they were gone. You remember how the choir tried their best. How the pretzels were slightly too salty. How the lobster puppet refused to stay on script. You remember the boy who said the spout winked at him. The little girl who called it spouty. The rivet in your pocket that may or may not be real. And somehow, in the sum of those ridiculous parts, something real happened. Boston became itself in a new way. Historians still argue, because of course they do, whether this whole event will be remembered a decade from now. Whether the kettle's farewell marked a new chapter in urban myth-making or was simply a flash of collective whimsy destined to fade. But deep down, you know the answer. Because memory doesn't follow rules. It doesn't care about academic rubrics or journal citations. It lives in emotion, in repetition, in the things we whisper to each other when no one official is listening. And right now, you can feel the whisper in the air. You stand. Stretch. Dust off your knees. Then you reach into your coat pocket. Yes, you're still wearing the one with the deep inside pocket, the one you used during the parade, and you pull out the last sticker. The glitter's mostly rubbed off. The edges are curled. It's hardly a relic anymore. But to you, it's everything. You walk to a nearby electrical box, one already covered in layers of other lives, band flyers, protest slogans, a drawing of a cat saying abolish brunch. And you stick it there. One last kettle. Facing the street. A tiny farewell to a bigger one. Then you walk on. The city yawns and shifts. Lights flicker on. Someone shouts a greeting in an accent thick with sea and salt. A bike bell chimes. A bus hisses at the curb. And you? You don't look back. Because you don't need to. The teapot isn't there. But the feeling is. In every story. Every smile. Every moment someone says, "Do you remember when?" And they will. Because Boston never forgets its ghosts. Especially not the ones shaped like kitchenware. So you cross the street. Slip into the rhythm of the crowd. And let the memory of a giant teapot, the friend, the folly, the farewell, steep quietly behind your heart like something too warm, too strange, too lovely to explain. And now, gently, we set the kettle down. Let your breath deepen. Let your thoughts float, soft and unhurried, like steam curling from the spout of a quiet room's only sound. The square is quiet now. The crowd has faded. The ribbons, the choirs, the rusted bolts, all tucked away. What's left is stillness. What's left is space. A sky cleared of symbols. A place to pause. A moment to remember the absurd beauty of caring deeply, even for the silly things. You're still here. Breathing. Remembering. Letting the story settle like leaves in warm water. The teapot is gone. But the warmth it poured into your memory? Still with you. So close your eyes. Let the city hum fade to a whisper. Let the echoes of laughter and whistles and waving hands drift further and further away. Until there's just the sound of breath. And the gentle sense that something was here. And it mattered. And now, peace. Sleep well.